I had a really strange event happen just last week. For some background, I live by myself and have an apartment. It's on the first floor of the building, but is still a little bit above the ground level. I was at home and having a relaxing night. However, it was all interrupted. I was just watching TV in the living room and eating when there was a knock at my front door. This was strange right away. I had never gotten a knock on my apartment door before. I've lived here for about a year, and nobody had ever knocked on my door to that point. I didn't even really know any of my neighbors or anything, so I had no clue why somebody would be at my door. Plus, it was like 10 p.m., so kind of late for that. My first thought was that it was possibly somebody at the wrong address. Still, I got up from the couch anyways and went over to look. When I got to the door, before opening, I chose to look through the peephole instead of opening the door, and I'm really glad that I did. Standing there was a man, or at least I thought it was a man, wearing a creepy old man mask. It almost looked real, and at first I thought it was an old man, but after a few seconds I could see how it was fake and a mask. It looked really weird. I obviously didn't know who this was, or why anybody would be knocking on my door dressed like this. I didn't answer the door, but I just kept watching him. After a short time, the guy knocked again. It was louder now. Then he just stood there looking right at my door. For a moment, I thought that he would somehow see that I was looking through the peephole. He seemed to be looking right at me. Then, after a little while of that, he turned and walked away. I thought that he might go and knock on someone else's door if this was a prank or something. However, I didn't hear any more knocking from the hallway. I was just relieved that he was gone though. Seeing him at the door was one of the strangest things that I had ever seen. I went back to the couch and was watching TV again, feeling better. But maybe 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door again. It was the same guy. I went back over and looked, and he was there just like before. He knocked again. I, of course, was not going to answer the door, but I was very curious as to what he wanted. Then, to my surprise, he tried to open my apartment door, which was locked. This changed everything in my opinion. What would he do if he got in? I ran away from the door at that point, and I considered calling the police. However, I didn't hear anything more, and then went back over to look in the peephole again. He was gone now. So I put my phone down and I went back to the couch, hoping that he was gone for good this time. But he was not. It was later though, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was getting tired and about to go to sleep, but there was a loud knocking at my door again. I knew who it was. I didn't bother to go over to the door or anything. He knocked twice, and I did not hear anything after that for a while. It was only then that I finally went over to make sure that he was gone. He was, and I then finished getting ready for bed and went to my room. When I was in there though, I'm not really sure why, but I decided to look out of the window. It overlooks mostly the parking lot. It was very quiet now, but had many cars parked all over. However, on the sidewalk not far away, I saw the man with the old man mask standing there, and he was facing my apartment window. It creeped me out so much. I covered the windows again and then went into bed. I tried to fall asleep, but it was pretty tough to relax. After a long time, I was eventually able to go to sleep. Since then, I haven't seen the guy or anything, and I'm hoping that I never see him again. I live by myself in a house a little ways outside of the city. This happened a couple of years ago. One day, I got home from work a little bit later at night. It was some time past 10 o'clock, and I was really tired. After getting inside of the house, I pretty much started getting ready for bed right away. I remember that I was in the bathroom across from the hallway from my bedroom when I heard a door downstairs closing. Instantly, I was creeped out when I heard it. I froze and listened to hear anything else, but there was just silence. After that, I left the bathroom and went back downstairs to see what it was. When I got downstairs though, I saw nothing. I noticed that I had left a window partly open and figured that the wind had blown the door shut. This is something that happens from time to time. I felt much better, and then I went over and shut the window and then headed back upstairs. Then I finished getting ready for bed and went into my bedroom. When all the lights were out and I closed my eyes to go to sleep, I heard another noise though. I thought it sounded like somebody walking around downstairs. At first, I told myself that I was being paranoid because of what I had heard earlier. I mean, it was hard to hear something downstairs clearly, It seemed like the noise really could have been anything because it was so far away and I could just barely hear it. Still, it was something, and it continued. I continued listening, and I realized that the sounds were actually getting louder. And then I realized that it sounded like somebody was coming up the stairs. That's when I realized that there was definitely somebody in my house. I started to panic, and I immediately got up out of bed and ran to my bedroom door. I closed it and then locked it. Then I went back over to the opposite side of my room and got my cell phone. I had no idea how, but somebody was inside of my house. As I scrambled to dial 911, I heard the footsteps approaching down the hallway. At that point, I froze. I was unable to speak because I didn't want this person inside the house to hear me. The 911 operator answered the phone, but I didn't say anything. I then heard the person inside of my house reach right outside my door, and then they tried the handle. The door didn't open because of it being locked, and after that the person turned and walked back in the opposite direction. After the footsteps went away, I'm not sure where they went. I was finally able to speak and told the 911 operator what was going on. I stayed in my room with the door locked, and I also stayed on the line with 911. They were really quick to respond, and within probably 3 or 4 minutes, police were at my house. During the time waiting, I didn't really notice hearing any other noises though, and when the police got there and did a thorough search of my house and yard, nobody was found. The door was unlocked though, which I'm 99% sure was not when I went up to bed. So I never found out who broke into my house. I also don't know how or when they got in. I'm guessing it was when I was at work, probably earlier in the night, maybe shortly before I arrived home. That's what makes the most sense in my opinion. My only guess as to how they got in was possibly the window that I had left open a little. It's ironic that seeing the open window made me feel better thinking the wind had blown the door shut, when possibly the intruder entered my house through that very window. Since then though, there have been no problems like it. I'm hoping that it stays that way. One night, back when I was 16 years old, I was home alone and in my bedroom. Both my parents went out for the night, and my older sister was staying over at her best friend's house. All my friends were busy, so I was just up in my bedroom playing on my computer. At about 9 o'clock or so, I remember that I thought I heard a noise from outside near the front door. It sounded like somebody was possibly trying to open the front door. I figured my parents might have been home early, so I didn't think much of it. But after like 2 or 3 minutes, I never heard the door open, and I realized that it was strange. Then I heard the same noise again. At that point, I got sort of a nervous feeling, so I decided to go down and see. Obviously, it was late to be getting anybody at the door, and I never heard a knock, but my bedroom was far away from that part of the house, so I wouldn't have heard it very clear. Soon, I made it to the front of the house, and then to the front door. When I got there, I looked out of the window, but nobody was in sight. I also went and looked out of the other front windows and saw nothing at all there either. I wasn't really sure what I had heard or thought I had heard. I couldn't really definitively say what it was, so I went around to a couple more windows and looked out of them as well, just to be safe. Everything seemed fine, so at that point, I decided to go back upstairs. I figured that if anybody had been at our front door or on the property, they had left. It was probably just somebody at the wrong house, if anybody was even there at all. So I got back up to my bedroom and then went inside and sat back down at my desk. Within a minute or so of being back at my computer, I had started to take my mind off what happened. I was feeling good and no longer worried about it. But then I heard another noise. This time it was unmistakable because of how loud it was. Somebody was knocking at the front door. Instantly, I was really nervous. I got up from my desk and left my room again. This time, I slowly made my way downstairs. I was nervous to see who was at the door, because at 9 o'clock it wouldn't be a salesman and probably not one of my friends. But I hung on to the hope that maybe it was nothing weird or creepy. When I got back downstairs, I walked over to the front door area. I was careful not to be in the way of the window to let whoever was there see me. But when I got to the front door and looked out, nobody was there. I went over to the front window again, which had a better view. Nobody was there either. I was really confused and also creeped out. I was telling myself that maybe it was just a prank. Nothing like that had ever happened before, but possibly some kids were playing ding-dong ditch or something. I stood around for a few more minutes looking around. That's when I heard this strange noise at the back door. I don't really know how to describe it, but I knew that somebody was there. If someone was at the back door, they would have gone all around our yard, which was fenced in, so I knew they were up to no good. I was really freaked out to go and see who was there, but for some reason, I did. I walked over to the back of the house, moving slowly and trying not to freak out. When I got into view of the back window, I just barely saw something. It looked like somebody was moving away from the back door and going further into the backyard. It was really dark back there, so I couldn't see much. I went over and looked around, no longer seeing them. Then I turned on the back light. For a second, I saw someone moving out of sight behind the trees. There were some trees partly in our yard and partly in the neighbors. For some reason, somebody was back there. I kept watching for a little while, and they did not return. I opened up a back window a crack and called out, "Hey, who's there?" There was no response, so I figured that they got the hint that I saw them and left. I thought about calling the police, but didn't because I figured that the person was gone, so I closed the window. I then made sure that the back door was locked and decided to go back up to my room. I hoped that my parents would be home soon. I walked back upstairs into my bedroom. The whole time I was just paranoid that the guy would return, but I was telling myself that he wouldn't. When I got back to my bedroom, I looked out of the back window into the yard and still saw nothing, so I sat back down at my desk again. I tried to distract myself from what had happened and focus on the computer again. After maybe a couple of minutes, I was starting to feel slightly better. All of a sudden though, I thought that I just barely heard the sound of the back door opening downstairs. I first went over to the window and looked out. I couldn't really see the back door from that angle though. I went over to my bedroom door and listened closely. When I did, I couldn't hear anything. By now, I was seriously considering calling the police. However, I just wasn't 100% sure of what I had heard. I thought maybe it was just my imagination from me being paranoid about what had happened earlier. So I decided to go downstairs. I quietly left my bedroom and tiptoed down the hallway and over to the stairs. When I got to the staircase, I looked around and saw nobody downstairs. So I went down them and was still looking around and feeling paranoid. When I finally got downstairs, I first headed over to the back door. When I got there, I could not believe what I saw. The door was wide open. I didn't see anybody in sight though. I went over to the door and closed it. Then I stopped and listened. I heard nothing. I called out again, trying to sound tough, and I said, "I already called the cops, they'll be here any minute." However, I didn't hear anything in response. Of course, I hadn't called the police. I wasn't sure if somebody was in the house or had already left. I went around towards the living room to look around. When I did, I was sure that I heard footsteps a little ways away. I stopped where I was. The footsteps were moving through the dining room and towards the kitchen. I stood there in the living room, too scared to move. Then I heard the footsteps seeming to approach me from behind. I looked back and just barely saw a shadow of someone starting to come around the corner. At that point, I just bolted up the stairs. I ran like crazy and went all the way into my bedroom. When I got inside, I slammed the door shut behind me. I ran to my bed and pulled the covers on top of myself. Then I called 911 on my phone and told police that somebody had broken into my house. After giving them my address and hearing that they would be there shortly, I just waited. It was now complete silence. A few minutes went by. Then I heard a quiet knock at my bedroom door. I was too scared to move. I stayed where I was and didn't do anything. The door didn't open though. Several more seconds went by. I thought that I heard footsteps in the hallway, just barely. Then I stopped hearing them. Several more minutes went by. Soon the police got there. I went down to talk to them, and whoever had been in the house was gone. The back door was still open though. And the strange thing is that nothing was stolen or anything. My parents got home a short time later. Nobody ever figured out who it was. It still creeps me out when I think about it to this day. This happened back when I was a kid. I think that I was about 10 years old or so. I don't recall the exact year. It was a long time ago though, and I lived at home with my parents. One night they were out, and I was left home all alone. To be quite honest with you, I was kind of nervous about it. I'm sure that this wasn't the first time I was ever left home alone, but it did not happen often. It was probably among my first 5 times being left home alone. With it being nighttime, that made me nervous. My parents were not going to be gone that long though, and they were supposed to be back by 10. Well, for most of the night, I just watched TV in the living room. At one point, probably around 9, my parents were still gone and I was still watching TV. The living room was at the front of the house, with the dining room being connected to that. Then there was the kitchen at the back end, which was not visible to me on the couch. I remember hearing some sounds coming from the kitchen area, sort of like from the window. I didn't know what it was, but I figured that it was our cat. He was always snooping around and climbing up onto random places. He walked on the sink multiple times, which was right by the window that I thought I heard the noise from. There was no doubt in my mind that it was the cat, so I hardly paid the sound any mind at all. I was just relaxing watching TV, and I wasn't feeling nervous or scared, but the noises got a little louder and different. After zoning out of them for a few seconds, assuming it was still the cat, I snapped out of it. I realized that these noises were not caused by a cat. I didn't know what they were, but I knew that they were far too loud. Suddenly, I was nervous, but I still hoped that it was my cat somehow, some way. I got up and walked over to the dining room. During this entire time, the noises were continuing. When I got within a few feet to the kitchen, I saw the back window by the sink. It was open, but there was supposed to be a screen on it as well. However, I didn't see the screen. It looked like it was open right to the outside. And as I was watching, I literally saw the window get pushed open further. Then I saw a man start to crawl through. It was a sight that I will never forget. That's something that I really thought that I would never see. In an instant, I took off and I started running back into the living room. Then I went to the stairs and ran all the way up. I didn't stop until I got into my bedroom and I closed the door behind me. Back then, I did not have a cell phone or a phone in my bedroom. The only landlines that we had were downstairs. My parents had cell phones, but I couldn't reach them because I wasn't going to go back down there. I was terrified and had no idea what to do. So I did the only thing that I could think of, which was to go into my bed and bury myself in the covers. I covered my ears and face and didn't want to see or hear anything that was going on. I just stayed like that for the longest time. I was trying to just block it all out, so I didn't hear anything, and I had no idea what the guy in our house was doing. This went on for a very long time. The next thing I knew though, when I finally decided to uncover myself, I heard a door open downstairs. I was scared at first and about to cover myself back up, but then I heard my parents' voices. This made me feel much better. Still, I did not leave my bedroom. I was still too scared. A short time later, I heard my mom calling my name, and I then answered, saying that I was in my room. She came upstairs and went into my bedroom. The first thing she asked me was what happened with the kitchen window. I guess she thought that I had broken it. I told her about the guy, and then she went downstairs and told my dad. He searched the house, and my mom also called the cops. The cops came to our house and searched it, however, the man was gone. Nothing was stolen either. I have no idea what exactly happened. I had really just been trying to block it all out. My best guess is when I saw the man enter our house, maybe he saw or heard me. If he did, if he had thought nobody was home, perhaps that was enough to scare him off. I'm just grateful that everyone ended up being okay. That was my scariest experience from being home alone as a kid. This story takes place several years ago now. At the time, I lived in an apartment by myself. I don't live there anymore and only lived in this particular place for 1 year. So it was a pretty decent apartment complex. The building was pretty new, probably less than 10 years old. It was clean for the most part and a nice place to live. Very shortly after I moved into my place is when this happened. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of the building. I was inside my place one night and it was getting pretty late. Things were quiet because of this, and out of nowhere I heard a knocking coming from the wall. This wall led to the apartment that was next to mine. I didn't know who lived there and had never seen them or anything. They knocked on the wall and then stopped, and then they knocked again. I had no idea why they would be knocking. It sounded very deliberate, not like they had bumped into the wall by accident or something. But I wasn't making any loud noises or anything. Things had been very quiet. I was confused. The knocking stopped for a short time, and then I heard it again. It was really strange. I thought about knocking back because I was kind of frustrated. I mean, I wasn't doing anything, and it was late at night. Why would they be knocking on the wall like that? Eventually, it stopped though, and I just let it go. By the next day, I forgot all about it. However, that night, it happened again, and I was reminded. The knocking started up right about at the same time as the previous night, if I had to guess. I didn't know what to make of this. Again, I wasn't being noisy at all. and nobody in the building seemed to be making a lot of noise, so it's not like they mistaked me for somebody being loud. It was very confusing. Like before, they knocked a few times on the wall and then stopped. Then, like a minute later, they knocked again. It was very strange. Eventually, again it stopped, and it was done for the night. The next day, I found out that the apartment next to mine was called a show unit. This means that nobody lives there, and when people get a tour of the apartment, they show them that one. That was even more confusing to me then, because that meant that nobody lived there. So why was I hearing knocking coming from that apartment very late at night? It was really strange. And that night, I heard it again. It was probably at around the same time as before. I wasn't looking at a clock, so I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing that it was. I was so curious about it, so this time I decided to investigate. I got up and walked out the front door of my apartment. I was now out in the hallway, and I walked towards the one next to mine. Things were very quiet, and nobody was out in the hallway at this hour. I approached the door to the apartment next to mine, and I noticed something. It was actually open. I couldn't really see inside, but the door was not shut all the way. It was resting against the door frame, but not closed. I walked closer to it and then decided to open it further. I knew this was nobody's place, so nobody should be inside of it. When I pushed the door open, I saw all the lights inside were off, so I couldn't see who or if anybody was actually in there. It was really quiet as well. I started to take a step inside, and then I heard footsteps. They were far away, but inside of the apartment, and the footsteps were heading in my direction. I got so freaked out that I just turned around and left. I quickly walked out of the apartment and then back to mine. I went back in and locked the door behind me. Probably 10 seconds after I was back in my place, I heard footsteps out in the hallway. Then they went right up to my door and somebody tried opening it. I was so creeped out by this point. After attempting to enter my place, they did not knock, but I heard them walking away. I went to the door and looked out, but they were gone by then. It was very strange. After that night, I never heard any more knocking coming from there. I still don't know who it was or why they were doing it. I live alone in a smaller house. I've lived here for 5 years now, and I would describe the neighborhood as average. By far the scariest thing to happen took place not too long after I first moved in. I'd been living here for maybe 6 months. One night, I was woken up out of nowhere to a loud banging at my front door. I remember being very confused at first, but once I came to my senses and realized what was going on, I looked at a clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I got up out of bed, and the loud pounding was still going on. I had absolutely no idea as to what this could possibly be. After leaving my bedroom and walking over to the front door, the banging suddenly stopped. Still, I went the rest of the way to the front door and I looked out of the window. When I did, I noticed that there was nobody there. I opened up the door and looked around. I saw nothing. Nobody in the street, nobody in my driveway or anything. It was very weird, because whoever had just been here seemed like they really wanted me to open the door. I stayed up for a little while after that, and nothing else happened, so soon I was able to go back to bed. I thought that maybe it was just a mistake or something, but I was still wondering about it all day the next day. Well, the very next night, something else happened. I was woken up in the middle of the night once again. This time, there was no knocking though. I remember hearing the sound of a car horn honking. It was coming from outside somewhere, but I couldn't tell exactly where. It sounded close by though. After it continued for a while, I got out of bed and once again headed to the front of my house. I was getting closer to the sound, and when I got there, I looked out of a window and I saw a car sitting in my driveway. I did not recognize it, but the horn was honking over and over. Obviously, with it being nighttime, I could not tell who was behind the wheel of it. I went to the front door and opened it up. When I did, the car suddenly stopped its honking and drove away really fast. I did not get a look at the license plate or anything. After the car drove away, I was once again left very confused. I figured this to be the same person who had been banging on my door the previous night, but why? I really didn't know. The car did not return that night, and once more, I went back to bed. The day after that, I was wondering if I would be woken up in the night again. I thought about going to the police, but ultimately I didn't do it that day. So that night, I was not woken up. I thought things were back to normal. However, as I was leaving for work, I noticed a note taped to my front door. I picked it up and looked at it. It was handwritten, and it said, "I will be back next week." This really creeped me out. Somebody was messing with me for some reason. After that, I did go to the police. I showed them the note and reported everything. They said they would look into it, but said that it might just be a prank. I was really nervous the next week, but nothing happened. I'm glad that nothing happened, but also I'm confused. Since then, though, nothing strange has occurred. I'm not sure if it was just some kind of a sick joke or what, but I'm glad that nothing more ever came of it. This happened when I was a teenager. One night, my parents went out, and my brother went to his friend's house to have a sleepover, so I was left home alone by myself. At first, I was just planning on staying in and relaxing, maybe watching some TV or a movie, or maybe just read or something like that. But I was Snapchatting with my best friend Alexis, and she asked me what I was doing. I told her, and she said I should come over. I guess her parents were gone too, and she was bored. I was too young to drive at the time, and I was not supposed to leave the house when I was home alone, but Alexis lived just a few blocks away, and I could walk there. I figured that I could easily go to her place and hang out for a while, and then be back by the time my parents were home. So I told her that I would come over. I left the house, made sure to lock it, and then walked to Alexis's place. It was maybe like a 10-minute walk. I got there and went inside. We hung out and talked and had some snacks. It was a good time, and I made sure to leave after like 2 hours. I figured that my parents wouldn't be home for another 30 minutes or so, but I didn't want to cut it too close. So I said bye to Alexis and then left. I began walking back home down the sidewalks in the neighborhood. The area was all residential with lots of other houses. By this time at night, it was dark out and the neighborhood was very quiet. Like 2 minutes into walking home though, and I remember hearing a car driving up behind me. But it didn't pass, it just started to drive sort of next to me but a little behind. When it drove that slow, I immediately found it suspicious. I looked over but couldn't see the driver. It was too dark out. I just kept walking and hoped that it wouldn't continue to follow me. But it did. I turned and so did the car. At one point when I turned though, the car went past me. I felt better for a moment and thought that it was gone, but then I saw the car turn around and go towards me again. Now I was pretty nervous. I kept walking home and just hoped that I would make it back okay. I started walking faster. Soon I was at our street. I got out my keys and was ready to run. When I saw our house in the distance, I just took off. I ran through the front yard, got to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. After slamming the door shut behind me and then locking it, I breathed a sigh of relief. But then I looked back out the window, hoping to see the car drive away. Instead, the car pulled into our driveway. I couldn't believe it, and was now really scared again. After parking in the driveway like they belonged there, whoever was driving the car stopped. They did not get out for a little while. After like 2 or 3 minutes, I saw the door open. A man stepped out. He had a slight beard, sort of long dark hair, and was kind of tall. He walked over towards the house. At that point, I moved away from the window and ran into the living room. Soon, I heard him knock on the front door. I was terrified. Of course, I was not going to answer it. After a little while, he knocked again. I still didn't answer. I didn't know what to do though. For some reason, the thought never occurred to me to call the police or my parents. After knocking twice, I didn't hear anything for a little while, so I went back over to the window and looked again. I didn't see the man at first, but his car was still there. Soon I noticed that he appeared to be inside of it, but he wasn't leaving. He just kept sitting there. I was really creeped out. Then I saw another car driving down the street. It slowed down in front of the house really slow. I then realized that it was my parents. They stopped, probably wondering who was in the driveway already. Then they started to turn to pull in. The man suddenly then put his car into reverse and backed out. After getting back onto the street, he quickly drove away, speeding in the process. My parents then parked in the driveway and I ran out to them. I told them what happened and they called the police. The cops came out and I talked to them for a little while. After they left, everything was fine, but I never heard anything more about it, so I don't know if the guy was ever found. Of course, I didn't leave the house at night by myself for a while after that. Looking back, I'm really grateful that I was able to get home safely that night and that my parents got home when they did. This happened back when I was 12 years old. It was the summertime, and I was at home by myself. Both of my parents were at work, and this was probably in the late morning. I just remember that it was a really nice day outside, so I went into the front yard, and I was reading a book in a chair that we had out there. After probably an hour of this, I remember noticing a car driving down our street. A few cars had already gone by that I had noticed. We lived on a quiet street that wouldn't get very much traffic, mostly just people who lived there. This one car in particular was going very slow. It was a black 4-door sedan, and after passing by, it went further down my street and then out of sight. I didn't think too much of it, but only about a minute later or so, I remember the car driving back from the other way. When it passed by our house, it seemed to slow down even more than it was already going. I also did not recognize the car, and I couldn't help but feel a little bit suspicious. The car ended up moving on and leaving the street though. At this point, I was hoping that it was just somebody who was maybe lost, so I stayed outside and kept reading. However, less than 5 minutes later, the car was back. It once again drove by and was going very slowly. I just had a bad feeling about it. The car luckily passed me by and continued down the street. When it did, I decided to go inside of the house. After getting inside, I think I went to the kitchen to get something to drink. I was going to go to my bedroom, but before that, I stopped at the front window. When I did, I saw the same car sitting in our driveway. I couldn't believe it. The car was parked at the back end of the driveway, and I could not see who was behind the wheel. But I did see somebody in the driver's seat, and it appeared to be a man. I watched the car, and it continued to sit there. Nobody got out. I didn't really know what to do, but I remember that I soon moved away from the window. I walked around the house. I don't really remember why, but when I returned to the front window, I could see that the car was now empty. The man had left it. I didn't know where he had gone though. I looked to the front step, and nobody was there, so he wasn't going to knock at the door or anything. I went to another front window and looked out, but saw nothing there either. At that time, I was trying to figure out what he could possibly be doing. I couldn't think of any logical explanation though. I went to go back to my bedroom. When I got inside though, I saw the man at my window just outside of it. We locked eyes for a brief moment before I quickly ran away. I ran into the kitchen to get the phone and call 911. However, when I did, I saw the man running away past another window. He then went around the house and back to his car. As I was calling the police, I could hear him driving away. I went through with the call anyways though. The police came out to our house, and I spoke with them for a while, telling them everything that I could. My parents got called and came home from work early. It was one of the craziest moments of my life. I'm really glad that the man was unable to get inside. After that, I never saw him again. This happened back when I was in high school a long time ago. We lived in this house that was way out sort of in the country. Our property was pretty large and we did have neighbors, but their houses were pretty far away. It was a quiet town located near some farms and things like that. That's what makes this story so strange. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I remember that my parents had to go to this wedding that was out of state. They left me and my older sister home for just a few days because we still had school and stuff. On one of the nights that my parents were gone, my sister went to her friend's house. I wasn't really sure how late she would be gone or if she was staying overnight or what, but I was just hanging out at home. I remember that I made a frozen pizza and I was in the living room. Our house was sort of a split level, so the living room was upstairs. At about 9 o'clock at night, I heard a knock at our front door. Immediately, this was very strange. This might not be weird for a normal neighborhood, but way out there we never had anybody knocking on the door. Our driveway was also super long and far away from the street. There would hardly ever be any cars on the street if it wasn't someone who lived there, and nobody really lived that close to our house. And that, with the fact that I was home alone, made me very concerned. I didn't immediately get up and see who was there, but after like 10 seconds, whoever was there knocked again. So at that point, I got up and I went over to my bedroom, which happened to sort of overlook the front door area. It was above it, so I felt safer looking from there. When I got to the window and looked out of it though, there was nobody at the front door. I looked around near the area and I looked around the driveway as well. I didn't see anyone. I didn't think that whoever had knocked would have had enough time to go all the way back down the driveway by then. I couldn't see to the street though, because we had these thick pine trees like a line in the front edge of our yard. That made me nervous that perhaps the person had gone someplace else in our front yard or something. I had absolutely no idea who could have knocked on the door. It wasn't my sister because she had a key to get in. I just went back to the living room after that and hoped that everything would be fine. And it was for the most part. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty nervous as it got later and later. I went over and checked the windows a few times, but I never saw anybody. At like midnight, I was still awake and my sister got home. I was glad that she was back. However, when she got inside, she told me that there was a car parked outside on the side of the street. You couldn't really see it from inside the house because of the trees. I asked her if anybody was inside of it and she said that she couldn't tell. I told her about the knocks on the door. We figured that they had to be related, but thankfully nothing else happened. By the next day, the car was gone and there were no more knocks on the door or anything. It's still the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me when I was home by myself though. One Friday night last summer, I was home alone while my family, besides my sister who was at work, stayed at the cabin. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially when I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, since I'm used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. Plus, if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. He's the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the doors or windows. So, the sound of his barks at nearly midnight were concerning. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I left where I slept in the basement and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I had let Bosco, the dog's name, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I'm a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and things like that, so I would never while home alone forget to close the door, and I'm 100% certain of that. I figured Bosco did his job, and the intruder was scared away upon opening the door and seeing the dog right there barking at him. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. Upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walked around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talked myself down until I could fall asleep. At about 2 a.m. that same night, my sister came home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement whining at my door. He's not supposed to be in the basement. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement. When I got up to let him outside, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him back in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door being ajar, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until a few days later. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up. She said that same night, an hour or so after she got home, she went to the kitchen and the door was open again. That same door that was locked from the inside and not opened since earlier that night. I couldn't believe it, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away, saying that maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it until we both realized that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in and not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked somebody in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of the house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that the house was not empty and there was also a dog who would bark at them if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly with when my sister would have found the door open once more. She said this time it was much wider than when I had found it, and this makes sense if they were in a hurry on the way out and didn't bother to close it. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I'm not fully sure why Bosco wasn't going crazy at the man the whole time. Maybe some treats were involved, or maybe he just calmed down and didn't worry about the intruder after he initially entered the house. It was so strange, especially with nothing from our house missing. But in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins. The other break-ins normally had nothing missing. It would be the same as what happened to us, literally only the break-in and entering part. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of somebody being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. Back when I was in high school, I lived at home with my parents and siblings. However, one night, my brother and my sister were over at their friends' houses. I had friends too, but I wasn't hanging out with them on this night. My parents went out with their friends as well, so I was all alone at home for the occasion. I was a freshman at the time and was too young to drive, unlike my two older siblings. I had stayed at home alone several times before, and I enjoyed it. It was nice to have the entire house to myself for a change, and usually I would just play video games though. So on this night, I remember that's what I was doing. I was up in my bedroom and playing on my PlayStation. My bedroom, along with everybody else's, was on the second floor of the house. The way my room was situated was that it was at the back side of the house and had a window that overlooked our backyard. In my room, the bed was against the wall, and then across from it was my desk and my TV. Then in the corner was my closet, which was next to the window. So I was in there just gaming, and at one point, probably around 9 p.m., I'd been doing that for hours. I would randomly glance outside every now and then for no particular reason. One time when I looked outside, I saw something. I rolled my gaming chair over a little ways to see what was in the yard. When I did, I realized that there was somebody just standing in the middle of our backyard wearing this creepy clown mask, and this person was looking right up at me. They wore normal clothes of a sweatshirt and jeans, but the clown mask went completely over the person's head, had long hair, and looked really scary. I instantly was freaked out, and I reached around and found my cell phone on the desk. I was ready to call 911 if anything happened. I tried to remember if all the doors were locked downstairs, and I thought that they were. I didn't want to go back to the window, but decided to carefully look. I went to the floor and ducked down. Then I looked over to the window and saw the clown man still standing there. He was still looking up at me. My windows had no cover, I remember. I used to have blinds, but they broke from me playing basketball in my room, so now I had nothing. Being on the second floor overlooking the backyard, I didn't mind, but now this was a problem. I turned my bedroom lights off and then decided to go downstairs and make sure that the doors were locked. I left my bedroom and then went downstairs. When I got to the front door, I saw that it was in fact locked. Then I carefully got to the back and saw that one was locked as well. So at that point, I went back up to my bedroom. When I got there though, the clown was now gone. I was so relieved to see that he had left. I went around the house and covered every window except for my own and the other bedroom ones. I also looked out of all the windows before covering them to see if the clown was still anywhere in sight. Thankfully, he was not. About an hour later, my parents and siblings returned home. I told them about the clown, and they figured that it was just someone joking around. So later that night, my parents went to bed. I stayed up late playing video games because it was a weekend, and I didn't have school the next day. So it was probably after midnight, and I remember that I saw the clown again. He was once more standing in around the same spot as before and looking up at me. I was super creeped out now. I wanted to tell my parents, so I left my bedroom and went out into the hallway, but everyone had gone to bed and I didn't want to wake them up. My siblings' doors were also closed and all the lights were off. I debated waking everybody up, but I also didn't want to seem like a wimp, so I went back into my bedroom and decided to watch the clown and see what he would do. He stood there just a little while longer. Now, my bedroom lights were off and had been for a while. But then the clown started waving at me. I was so creeped out that I ran and found a random blanket and then just ran back to the window and covered it. I held it there in place for a while and then went around and found some tape in my room and taped the blanket to the wall. I didn't want to look out there. I stayed up for a little while longer, too scared to go to bed. Finally, I looked again and the clown was now gone. After that, I was able to go to sleep. But that experience with the clown really freaked me out. It's still something that I think about sometimes. I wonder who that was and why they chose to go to our backyard and look in my bedroom window. This is something that happened when I was 14 years old. Being an only child, I was fairly used to being home alone by myself from time to time. It usually wouldn't happen for very long periods of time though, but every day when I would get home from school for a few hours, I would typically be at home by myself. One Friday in the fall, I went to school and arrived back as normal. My parents were still gone at work, and they would be gone for a lot longer that night. I can't remember if it was my mom or my dad, but one of my parents had a work dinner event thing to go to. So both my parents were going straight there after work, and they would be gone until that night at about 9 or 10 o'clock. And they told me this beforehand and left me money to order a pizza to have it delivered if I wanted. So I was kind of excited for that. I was also excited to be able to just watch TV and play video games all night, or at least until my parents got back. After arriving home from school, I went directly up to my room and started gaming. Eventually, I went downstairs and hung out there for a while. Then when I got hungry, I ordered pizza. I would guess at around 7 o'clock that night, the pizza guy arrived. I answered the door, got the pizza, paid him, and then went up to my room. I started eating pizza and playing video games, which was a dream night for me back then. However, about an hour into this, and I heard the main front door to our house open downstairs. It surprised me right away, because other than my video games and the TV on a low volume downstairs, the house was completely quiet. At first, I thought that it had to be my parents, obviously, but two things were off. Number one, my parents were not supposed to be back this early, and if they were, they probably would have texted me. Number two, I didn't hear them unlock the door. It had simply just opened. As I was thinking these thoughts, I listened and heard somebody now walking into the house, although I could not hear very well being upstairs and in my bedroom. I thought back to when I had picked up the pizza from the delivery driver. That's when I realized that I thought I forgot to lock the front door. I think I just got the pizza and then went back inside and closed the door but didn't lock it. I felt terribly nervous now because I couldn't honestly remember locking it. Meanwhile, I heard footsteps downstairs going closer towards the staircase. I thought about yelling, asking if it was one of my parents, but decided not to. I also thought about trying to yell something threatening or fight whoever was in the house if it was not my parents. But I had no fighting skills. I was a skinny 14-year-old kid and didn't have anything really to use as a weapon either. Now the footsteps had reached the stairs and they were starting to walk up. I got even more nervous. As whoever was in the house was walking up the stairs, I sat there in my gaming chair basically frozen with fear. My bedroom was the second door on the left once you got up the staircase to the second floor, and my door was not closed all the way, it was open about a foot. After the person reached the top of the stairs, I finally had the thought to close my door, but I felt like it was too late, so I didn't. My door had no lock, and the person would see me closing it, giving me away if I did. So what could I do? I couldn't really think of anything. I looked to the door, and the way the door opened was opposite where the person was, so even though they were now in the upstairs hallway, I couldn't see them and they couldn't see me. They continued walking closer at a slow but steady pace. I was still sitting in my chair. I'm not sure if I was just frozen with fear and too scared to move, or if I didn't move because I knew I would make a sound. Because obviously I wanted to hide under my bed or in the closet, anywhere that would be out of sight from this person if they chose to enter my room. But moving now would make too much sound. However, the one thing that I did have going for me was that the lights in my bedroom were off. I liked gaming in the dark. I should also mention that I had paused my game shortly after hearing the door open and the person enter the house, so that wasn't making any sound. The only noise I heard was the footsteps and the very low volume of the TV downstairs in the living room. The person walked right in front of my doorway. Then, for a moment, I saw somebody come into my view in the open crack of the door. I looked away out of fear. I was sure that the person would open the door the rest of the way, and who knows what would happen. But it didn't. I heard the footsteps moving away. I looked back over and now saw nobody there. The footsteps were now going back down the stairs. Whoever it was leaving, and they were also walking a little bit faster. Eventually, they reached the bottom of the stairs and then went towards the front door. Then they left. When I heard the door close, I ran downstairs and locked it. I looked out the windows but didn't see anyone. They must have gone out of sight. I didn't see any strange cars or anything. It was really weird. I then called my parents, who came home. Whoever had entered the house, though, was long gone. Nothing was stolen or out of place, and I never got a good look at them. I think that it was a man based on the little I saw, but that's just a guess. Overall, I have no idea why this person entered our house. Did they know that the door was unlocked? And what did they want inside? After that, I did not want to stay home alone for a while, but I did. I would have to stay at home after school while my parents were at work, but I didn't stay home alone at night for a while after that. This happened a few years ago. During this time, I lived alone. I had a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of my building. Overall, the apartment complex was pretty nice, and I liked it a lot. However, I only ended up living there for 1 year, which was the term of my lease, and then I moved to a different place. This event took place towards the end of my lease. It was nighttime, and I was home alone. My living room was at the back end of the apartment, with the kitchen at the front. As it was getting late at night, I was planning on going to bed. It was maybe around 11 o'clock or so. So I went over to my living room window. It was a large sliding glass door that opened up to a small balcony that I had. I went to close the blinds like I did every night before bed. When I was doing this, I got a view out to the parking lot, which also happened to be where my car was parked. And when I looked out there, I noticed that there appeared to be a person standing right next to my car. This caught my attention, so I kept looking. I noticed that it was a man, and he appeared to be messing around with my car. I saw him try to open my door, but the car was locked. I could see him then looking in the windows and stuff. I opened up the sliding door to the balcony, and I stepped out onto it. Then I yelled to the man that that was my car. When I did, the man looked up and saw me. I was hoping and also expecting for him to stop what he was doing and run away. After staring right at me for a few moments, I yelled again, asking what he was doing. The guy didn't answer me. In fact, he didn't say anything. He just kept staring at me for a few more seconds. Then he began walking away from my car, but towards my building. I watched the guy walk all the way to where the front doors of the apartment are. Then he went out of my sight. The doors were not in my view, so I didn't know if he had entered the building or not, but it sure seemed like he was going to. This seemed odd to me, because if somebody was trying to break into a car, I wouldn't suspect them to live there. I would have figured it to be somebody just passing by or something. I was just glad that he left my car though, without breaking in or anything. But I was a little bit suspicious with him being in the building. I didn't recognize the guy, but I also didn't know that many people that lived in the building. I went back inside, closed the blinds, and then started getting ready for bed. But probably about 2 minutes later, I heard somebody trying to open the door to my apartment. I walked over to the living room and then looked at the door. It was locked. After things were quiet for a few moments, I walked over and looked through the peephole. I saw the same guy who had been outside at my car. I didn't open the door, but I kept watching him. He stood there by my door for a short time, then he knocked on it. I didn't answer it, of course. Then the man turned and walked away. I was left with many questions. Who was this guy? Why was he at my car? And why was he now at my door? At that point, I just went to bed though. And after that, I only saw the guy one other time. I arrived home from work one afternoon. I parked my car in the parking lot and then went inside to the building. When I did, I got inside the elevator to take me up to my floor. Right after I got inside though, I saw the same man come into view. He was walking down the hallway and headed towards the elevator. The guy was kind of far away, but after he saw me, he started speeding up and almost running to try to catch the elevator before it closed, but it ended up closing before he could reach it. I went up to my floor and quickly went inside. The man didn't come to my door again though or anything. I only lived there for about 2 more months after that, and I never saw that guy again. I live alone. This is something that happened just a few months ago. So my apartment is pretty standard for the most part. However, the front door opens right up to the outside, and there's a small grass area there. To the right of that is the parking lot. Then there are several levels of units. Mine is on the first level. I was at home one evening after I had gotten back from work. I was in the kitchen cooking, and right in the middle of that, my doorbell rang. I wasn't able to go over to the door right away, but I stopped what I was doing and then went over there. This was maybe 20 seconds after the bell had rang. When I got there though, I didn't see anybody. I looked out the window to as much as I could see and there was nobody there. So at that point, I just went back to cooking. I didn't really know who it could be or why somebody would be ringing my doorbell. I figured that it was most likely someone at the wrong apartment though. Nothing else happened for a while. Several hours later, I was in my living room just hanging out. Then the doorbell rang again. I remembered from before and wondered if that person was back. Then the doorbell started ringing again and again a bunch of times really fast. I was so confused. I got up and started walking over to the door. In the time that I was going over there, the doorbell ringing stopped. Before opening the door though, I made it to the window and then looked outside. When I did, I was surprised to see that nobody was there again. They had been ringing my doorbell so many times in a row like they really wanted me to answer, and now they were just gone. I didn't know what to make of it. I looked around for several minutes but didn't see anyone. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I only stayed up for maybe another hour if that. Then I was tired and decided to go to bed. I started turning off the lights in my apartment, but before heading to my bedroom, I went over to the front door and looked out of the window one last time. However, this time I saw something. There was this tall and kind of thin man just standing there a few feet away from my door. He wasn't facing me, but kind of to the side. He didn't appear to really be doing anything though. The guy was wearing all black clothing and I had no idea who he was. I thought that this was maybe the person who kept ringing my doorbell. It just seemed really suspicious though. I watched him for several minutes. The man just stood there and sort of looked around. Then he started walking away slowly. He went in the grass area out front and then he walked across the quiet street that was there. After crossing, he walked right into the woods. There was no path or anything. He just went right in, and the woods there is very thick. I was so confused and also creeped out. Since then, I haven't had any more strange doorbell rings or anything. I also haven't seen the guy, and I'm still wondering who he is and what he was doing. I'm also wondering why he just went in the woods like that. Last year, I was living by myself in an apartment building. I lived on the second floor in a typical one-bedroom place. I worked many different hours at my job, and would usually get home sometime in the afternoon or night. On this night in particular, I left work sort of late. I just remember that I was tired and it had been a really long shift. I got back to my apartment, parked my car, and then went up to my place. When I went inside though, I realized that I had forgot my phone. It sometimes would fall out of my pocket when I was getting out of my car, usually on the driver's seat. I was annoyed but quickly left my place and went back down outside to the parking lot. I got my phone from inside of my car and then I went back in my apartment. After that, I was pretty tired. What I really wanted to do the most was just go to sleep, so I started to get ready for bed at that point. It was during this time that I thought I heard a noise from the other end of my apartment. I wasn't really 100% sure though because I was brushing my teeth. I didn't know for a fact if it was from inside my apartment or maybe from the neighbors next door. It really kind of sounded like it was from mine though. I stopped and then looked over but saw nothing. I didn't hear any other noises either, so I just continued to brush my teeth. After that, I went into my bedroom to go to sleep. Maybe it was because I was really tired, but I pretty much just completely brushed off the noise that I heard, or that I thought I heard. After going into my bedroom though, I was sure that I heard another noise. I couldn't really tell what exactly it was though. My lights were all off at this point now. I walked out of my bedroom and then I looked into the living room and kitchen area. The apartment was not that big, so if the lights were on, I would have been able to see the whole thing, but they were not. When I looked though, I saw that there was someone definitely walking through the living room towards the front end of the apartment. I was so surprised that I didn't know what to do for a second. I couldn't really see any details on them because all the lights were out, but I could just see the movement really. Then, as I was still standing there, I turned the light switch on. When I did, I suddenly saw a man who I did not recognize walking to the front door of my apartment. He quickly opened up the door and then went outside and left. After he was gone, I went over to the door and I locked it. I was so confused as to what had just happened. At first, I had no idea how the man got into my apartment, and I thought maybe he had been there all day. I figured that he had to have been hiding in the coat closet in order for me to not see him. I looked around and nothing was stolen or anything. I called the police and reported the incident. I was not tired at all anymore, but wide awake. When the police were there and I was talking to them, I remembered how I had forgot my phone in the car. When I went to get it, I was only gone for like a minute, if that, so I didn't lock my apartment door. That must have been how the man was able to get inside. I'm not sure if he had just been in the apartment building, or if he had maybe followed me home or something without me noticing. I hadn't been paying the greatest of attention to my surroundings. But after the police talked to me, they looked around the complex and were not able to find the man. I was really hoping that they would. Nothing else like that happened when I lived in the apartment. I moved and live in another apartment now. This happened back when I was a teenager and in high school. I lived with my parents, but they both worked, so I was left home alone quite often. I remember that one evening my parents were both still gone. I didn't know exactly when they would be home. I was upstairs in my bedroom and on my computer. In the midst of this, I heard a knock on the front door of our house. When I heard it, it seemed strange right away, because that was unusual. Our neighborhood was generally pretty quiet. Plus, it was a little bit later now, but I wasn't really scared or anything. I was more just curious, so I got up from my desk and then left my bedroom. It took me a while to walk downstairs and get to a window with a view of the door, so I half thought that whoever was knocking might be gone by then. But when I got to a window that looked out to the door, I saw 3 men standing there. They looked kind of sketchy, and I definitely was not going to answer the door for them. I kept watching them though. The men stood around for at least a minute. I didn't know who they were or where they had come from. Our neighborhood was quiet, like I said, and typically didn't have sketchy characters walking around. I was getting nervous now. Finally, the men started to walk away from the front door area, but they did not leave. Instead, they went towards my driveway. I thought they were leaving at first until they turned to the right. That's when I realized that they were going for the garage, and I remembered that our garage door was open. We had a garage that was attached to the house. We rarely closed the garage door because there was nothing really of value in it. My parents pretty much just parked their cars in it, and then there was some random other junk there. But there was also a door in the garage that connected to the inside of our house. That's when I had the sudden thought that that door might not be locked. I quickly ran over and looked, and sure enough, it was unlocked. I went over and locked the door as fast as I could. Then I walked away from it, and like 20 seconds after I had locked it, one of the men tried opening it. I could not believe how close I came to these men just entering my house. I was still really nervous though. What if they tried to break in or something? I quickly ran around and made sure that all the other doors were locked. I didn't want to hear what the men were doing, and I didn't know if they were still in the garage or what. I really didn't want to know either. So I went back upstairs to my bedroom and called the cops, as well as my parents. I stayed in my room until the police arrived. It felt like a long time, but it took less than 10 minutes for them to get there. When the police were there, they searched everywhere around our property, but the men were all gone. My parents arrived home shortly after. We talked with the cops for a while, and we had no idea who the guys were or what they wanted. I was just glad that they were gone. After that, I was pretty nervous for a while when I was home by myself. But thankfully, the men never returned to my knowledge, and nothing like that happened again. That attempted break-in still gives me the creeps to remember back on. I can't imagine what would have happened had I not locked that door. When I was around 14 or 15 years old, I was home alone one afternoon, and I was loving the freedom. My parents had taken my younger brother to a full-day event, leaving me behind. I had the whole house to myself, and I enjoyed it more than I probably should have. I'd only been left home a handful of times before, and I was used to having my family around, so this felt like a small taste of independence. I was bored, and one of my friends was having people over, so I figured I'd swing by. My parents had told me specifically not to leave the house while they were gone, but I didn't think much of it at the time and didn't listen. I grabbed my jacket, threw on my shoes, and headed out. Looking back, I can't believe how careless I was. I didn't lock the door when I left, which in hindsight seems like an obvious thing to do, but I was too excited to see my friends, and locking up wasn't on my mind at all. I was out for a few hours, and when I came back, I knew I had messed up big time. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw that the cabinets were open and stuff on the counters and table had been messed around. I started calling out hello, hoping that whoever had come inside was gone by now. I didn't hear a response, so I began looking around the living room and kitchen to see if anything was missing. Just as I was about to head upstairs to check, the home phone rang, an unknown number calling. I stared at the screen for a second, unsure whether to pick up. Maybe it was just a spam call or some telemarketer, but I answered it anyways. On the other end of the phone was just deep, heavy breathing. After a few seconds of breathing, I said, "Hello? Who's this?" Once again, I asked who was on the other end, and in the middle of my sentence, I was cut off by the voice on the other end, which said, "I'm in the house." I tried to play it off, hoping that it was just a prank call, but I responded by lying and saying that I was home with my family and there wasn't anybody in the house. The voice on the other end responded and said, "We both know that's a lie," then abruptly hung up the phone. Next, I heard a quiet creaking from upstairs. I once again yelled out hello, and I heard whoever was upstairs pick up the pace. The footsteps ran down the hallway towards the stairs that I was standing near. I was worried that they were coming for me now, and I went through the back door and bolted towards the woods behind the house. I knew that I had to get as far away as possible. I didn't stop running until I got to a neighbor's house who let me use their phone to call the cops. When the police arrived, they found the door wide open, just like I'd left it when I ran. They didn't find anyone in the house, but they did tell me that it seemed like someone had been there, obviously. So whoever it was who had broken into my house and potentially wanted to hurt me got away. I refused to be left home alone for many years after that day. I was a 14-year-old boy when this happened. I usually felt safe at home and didn't think much about danger or anything like that. My parents were out for the evening and wouldn't be back until very late at night, so the house was mine for a few hours. Wanting some company, I called two of my friends and asked if they wanted to come by. They both said yes and told me that they would get there at around 6 or 7 p.m. respectively. I watched TV and messed around on my phone to pass the time until my first friend arrived. When he got there, we talked for a bit, and then we headed out to go wait for my other friend at the park down the road. There we would meet him on his walk over from his place. I locked the front door, put the keys in my pants pocket, and we headed off. We waited at the park until about 7:30, but my friend ended up canceling on us. After standing around for a while and getting bored, we decided to head back to my house. When we got there, I reached into my pocket to grab my keys, but they weren't there. I checked all my pockets again and started to panic a little, thinking I had lost them somewhere. Before I could say much, James tried the door and it just opened. It was unlocked. We both just assumed that I must have left the keys inside on the side table and accidentally forgotten to lock the door, even though I was almost certain that I had locked it. The keys were exactly where they usually were. We shrugged it off and just went inside. For the next few hours, we played Xbox, talked about random stuff, and didn't think much more about it. Around 10 p.m., James said that he had to head home, so I walked him to the door and locked it behind him. Not long after he left, I went to grab my phone and realized that it wasn't where I had left it. I found it on the floor, and the screen was smashed into pieces to the point where it was unusable. I figured James must have knocked it off accidentally and didn't want to admit it, especially since he left in a hurry. Annoyed but tired, I went upstairs and laid in bed watching TV. About 10 minutes later, it occurred to me that if my phone was broken, I should probably make sure that the landline was nearby in case I needed to call my parents. I went downstairs to look for it, and that's when I found it broken as well, in pieces behind the couch. That's when I completely lost it. I started freaking out, ran out of my house, and sprinted to my neighbor's place. I was shaking and basically begged them to let me use their phone. I called the police, and when they arrived, they searched my house. That's when they found a very small-sized man hiding inside my bedroom wardrobe holding a 10-inch knife. My parents were called immediately, and when they arrived, they just held me while I cried. I must have thought I dropped the keys in my pocket when I left for the park, but accidentally dropped them on the ground right outside my door. The whole experience taught me a lot about safety and being aware of my surroundings, lessons that stuck with me later in life, especially after having more encounters with creepy people. I live alone in a small house that I rent, and this happened just a few weeks ago. So, one night I was watching TV by myself in the living room. I was sitting on the couch and just having a relaxing night. For some context, the living room is at the front end of my house. My couch is against the large living room window which looks out to the front yard. So, as I sat on the couch, the window was directly behind me. It's a very long window that stretches across much of the room. There are curtains on each side that can be closed, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to close them most of the time. So when I go to bed, I just shut the lights off. So there I was, sitting on the living room couch and watching television. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking coming from right behind me. Somebody was knocking on my window. It really startled me, and I quickly looked back. When I did, I saw this man standing there in the bushes. He was right on the other side of the glass, like 3 feet away from my head. The man was wearing a sweatshirt and a jacket as well. Both hoods were up far, covering most of his face. It was a kind of rainy night, but this still looked super suspicious. I really couldn't see the guy's face at all. Plus, it was really dark out there. The more suspicious thing, though, was that he was standing in my bushes and knocking on my living room window. My house was not super close to the street either. You would have to walk through the whole front yard to get to it. After seeing the guy, I got up from the couch quickly to put some distance between us. I moved back to the edge of the living room. However, the man did not move. The guy still stood there looking at me, but also sort of looking down kind of. He didn't wave or say anything. I kept watching him, and he kept seemingly watching me. After probably a minute or two, I yelled at him. I asked him what he was doing. At first, the guy did nothing. He didn't answer me. He didn't even really react. Then, he moved away from the window to the side, going out of my view. It did not appear as though he was going off my property, but just to another area of the house. I moved out of the living room to try to figure out where he went. He had gone in the direction of my bedroom, so I went there and looked out of the window, but I didn't see him. Then I went around my house looking out of every window. I didn't see the man anywhere. It was possible that he had left my property, and I was hoping that was the case. My front and backyards are not that big, but I do have some trees and bushes. Plus, there really isn't much lighting at all, so I couldn't really see. I went around looking out of the windows from all angles. I went into the kitchen to look into the backyard, and I still didn't see the guy. So I decided to go outside to look. I wasn't trying to hunt him down or anything. I just wanted to verify that he was off my property and the vicinity for my own peace of mind. So I went out the front door and then walked around my house looking. I didn't see the guy at all, and I felt fairly confident that he was gone by now. What that was all about, I didn't know, but I went back inside and tried to relax again before bed. It was pretty late by now, and I had been planning on going to bed pretty soon anyways. I was up in the living room for a little while longer, and nothing happened, so I went to bed. However, I found it very hard to get to sleep. I wasn't tired anymore, and I was feeling paranoid from the strange man at my window. I laid there in bed for probably 30 minutes trying to fall asleep. Then, as I was laying there, I heard the sound of somebody loudly trying to enter my back door. Thankfully, it was locked. I got up and I started turning on all the lights in my house. I also called the cops. Then I started looking out of all the windows. I didn't see anything. I'm guessing that it was the same guy, but he was gone now. When the police got there, I told them about what happened. I gave them a description and they said that they would look around. But after searching my property and the immediate area, they didn't locate him. He hasn't been back since, and I'm hoping that I never see that guy again. I live alone in a house, and I've lived here for 2 years now. This is an event that took place several months back, and it's still very fresh in my memory. So, it was nighttime, and I was alone in my house, and in my bedroom. The house is not very large, and my room is on the ground level. As I was watching TV and sitting on my bed, it was starting to get late and was maybe 11 or 12. Because it was late, things were very quiet aside from the volume on my TV, which was not that loud. All of a sudden, I heard this noise from the back end of my house. It sounded like maybe from the backyard, and it seemed like somebody had hit a back window. Before I could compute what was going on in my head though, I heard glass breaking. The sound was coming from the same area. Then I knew that somebody was breaking in. My first reaction at that point was to run to my bedroom door and lock it, which I did. I heard whoever had gotten in the house was still at the back side of it. Then my next course of action was to dial 911. I went over and located my phone, which was also on my bed. I quickly scrambled to dial for the police. Then I went to the back corner of my room. As soon as someone answered the phone, I said that my house was being broken into. I gave my address, but I spoke as quietly as I could. I didn't really hear anything during that time as far as where the intruder was, but maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the footsteps approaching the hallway where my bedroom is. Then, moments later, they arrived right outside my door. I muted the phone and tossed it aside in a panic. I didn't want them to hear me. Then the intruder tried opening my bedroom door. That got me really scared because I had hoped that maybe they wouldn't want to be seen. I felt like they knew I was in here, but possibly they just wanted to see what was in the room. Maybe they just wanted to steal stuff. But now they were coming straight for me. After the door did not open from being locked, I heard a loud man's voice. He yelled for me to open the door now. It was very angry, and of course, I was not going to do that. After a few seconds, he banged on the door very hard 2 times. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. I debated trying to open my bedroom window and jump out of it, or I could look around and see if I had anything to use as a weapon. I didn't really have much of anything though. I was heading over to the window and the guy started to walk away. Then I stopped. If he was leaving, I didn't want to run into him out of the house. I wasn't sure where he was going though or what he was doing, but I was just moving off of instincts at that point. My mind barely was even thinking at all. I don't even know how long this went on, but I was basically just pacing around and listening for the man. I didn't really hear much though. After I have no idea how long, I heard my back door opening. Then, probably like 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard noises out front. I still thought that it was the man, but it was actually the police. They came inside and I finally left my room. After searching the house, the man had left out the back door just a short time earlier. Some other cops searched the neighborhood and were able to find the man. He was caught just a block away, which made me feel 100 times better. I didn't know who he was or why he chose to break into my house. I'm really glad that my bedroom door had a lock on it though. If not, I'm not sure what would have happened. I work from home and live in an apartment. I have my computer set up in the corner of my living room, and that's where I sit all day during the week. My apartment building is pretty new and fairly nice. It's not at all some cheap dump or anything like that. It's located in a pretty populated area about 10 minutes outside of the city. But there was this one time when something really crazy happened. So it was a weekday and I was at work. Like always, I was sitting at my desk in the living room and on my computer. I don't recall the exact time, but I'm guessing at like 1 p.m. or so, I heard a knock on my door. It was unusual for anybody to be at my door, but living in a large apartment building is not a crazy thought, especially with it being right in the middle of the day. I got up from my desk and then walked over to the door. Before opening it, I first looked out of the peephole. When I did, I saw that there were 2 men standing there wearing maintenance uniforms. One of them was holding something and the other guy had a toolbox. Realizing they worked for the apartment building, I opened the door. The first guy said that they were there to change the air filters and they would be in and out really quick. I then noticed the thing the other guy was holding was in fact an air filter. I hadn't got any emails about them being changed, but I couldn't remember the last time that they were changed, so I said come on in and let them in. They walked straight for where the air filter was, which was in this small closet that was in my bedroom. The guys said thanks and they would only be a minute. Then I walked back over to my desk and sat down again and got back to work. For maybe a minute total, the guys were in my room. Then I heard them walking out. The door to my apartment opened and shut and they left, and I was busy working, but about a minute later, I got up and walked over to the door and locked it. Then I went back again and continued working. I worked for about another 4 more hours or so until I was off at 5. Then I logged out of everything and was done with work for the day. I didn't really feel like going anywhere and I was planning to just order food later that night. In the meantime, I did some small tasks around the apartment. I unloaded the dishwasher or something like that, and then I remembered that I went to take out the trash. We had a room at the end of the hallway for trash, and there was a chute that you would just dump the garbage down. So I took my garbage bag, left the apartment, and walked down the hallway to the end of it. I dumped the trash and then walked back to my place. I was gone for a total of maybe 1 minute. After walking back to my apartment though, right away I saw someone. There was a random guy in my place. He was just standing in the living room, and as soon as I entered, he saw me. My reaction was to quickly leave. I walked out into the hallway. I remember looking at the door and confirming that this was my place. I didn't accidentally walk into the wrong unit. For some reason, I went back in. I didn't see the guy, but I heard the man running into the other room. I was so confused and creeped out that I just left again and went down to the lobby. There I called the cops. I waited there for them, and when they arrived about 5 minutes later, they went up to my place. After they looked all around, they didn't see anyone. The man was gone. But after answering questions and talking to the police, I realized what happened. The men who entered my apartment to change the air filter did not work there at all. There was no plans for the air filters to be changed that day. That's why I never got an email or anything like that about it. The two guys walked in, pretended to change it because I was in the other room. Then one of the men hid in the small closet where the air filter was kept. The other guy left, which I did not see because I was over at my desk where it wasn't really in my view. I assumed that they both left, but really I had just heard one of them leaving. The other guy must have waited around the rest of the day for me to leave. When I walked to take the trash out, he must have thought that I was actually going somewhere and would be gone for a while. Then I think his plan must have been to steal my stuff. That's my best guess. But I walked back in a lot quicker than he expected, ruining his plans. In the end, he just left and did not take anything, probably because he knew I would know who did it. The man thankfully ended up getting caught along with his partner in crime about a week later. They had broken into different apartment buildings pretending to be maintenance workers there as well. It was not their first time doing it. They had all kinds of phony plots to get in people's places. They would steal anything of value. I'm really glad that I got back when I did, and that I wasn't hurt or anything, and I'm glad that the men were caught. It was about a year ago when my parents and sister went out of state for a sports tournament, and I was left alone in the house for 3 days. I'd never been home by myself for that long, and I thought it would be nice to have some peace and quiet. The first night went by without anything out of the ordinary. I watched a couple of movies, made some popcorn, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't think much of it when I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. It was not anything specific, just a weird sense that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, everything seemed fine. I spent most of the time inside, just relaxing and watching more movies. By the evening, the feeling started to creep up again, like there was someone there, even though I was alone. I checked the house to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked, and everything looked normal. I even walked around the yard for a bit to see if anybody was outside, but I didn't find anything. By the time the third night rolled around, I was starting to get a little jumpy. I woke up again between 2 and 3 a.m. and I heard footsteps outside. It wasn't anything loud, just faint footsteps like somebody was walking on the gravel path outside. My heart started to race a bit, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't fall asleep again, so I grabbed my shoes and flashlight, and I went outside to check things out and ease my mind. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight around, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel stupid about going outside alone in the middle of the night when I heard something from the woods behind the house. It was faint, but it sounded like a branch snapping, like something was walking through the trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked towards the sound. As I got about halfway from my house to the edge of the woods, I heard a loud, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was an animal or human, but it's a wild area behind my house, and it could have been a fox or a mountain lion. Either way, I freaked out, ran inside, and locked all the doors and windows. I peered through the curtains, trying to see if I could spot anything or anyone. I opened the curtains to a man standing close to the window, staring directly at me. As soon as he saw me, he turned and sprinted towards the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, so I stayed up and watched more movies, and thankfully nothing else happened that night. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them what happened. Since then, I've been home alone 5 more times, and I've never seen the man again. I don't know what he was doing, and if the scream I heard was related to him or not, or just a coincidence from an animal, but it was a scary night. This is something that happened when I was in high school. I think I was about 15 years old, and I remember that I was home by myself one night. My parents went out somewhere, I really don't remember, and my brother must have been gone someplace too. I'm not sure where everybody was, but I just know that I was by myself. We had a dog back then whose name was Thomas, and he was home with me. I was doing my homework up in my room after my parents left, I remember. I was up there for a while and then came down at probably 8 o'clock or so to get something to eat. When I did, I was in the kitchen and Thomas needed to go out, so I let him out in the backyard. Our house was 2 stories and about average size, and it had a backyard of about a half an acre that was fenced in. There were a few trees around there, but overall it was a good amount of space for Thomas to run around. He would usually go outside and do his business, and then run around for a while and then go by the door when he wanted to be let back in. So I remember that after a while, I let him back in and then I went back upstairs. I returned to my homework, which would always take me a long time to do. I was pretty good at school and always had good grades, but homework would always take me forever. So maybe 30 minutes later, as I was still up there, I heard the back door to the house open. My first thought was that my parents or brother had returned home. They would never enter through the back door, but I thought that maybe they had already arrived back and I just hadn't heard them enter through the front door. I had been pretty preoccupied with my stuff, so maybe I hadn't realized. I decided to go downstairs at this point, so I got up from my desk, left my bedroom, and then headed down the staircase. The stairs at our house went down towards the back of the house between the dining room and back living room area. I made it literally 2 steps down the stairs when I saw someone down in the dining room. It was a man, but nobody that I knew. I instantly turned around and went back upstairs. I quickly ran back to my bedroom, went inside, and locked the door. I had just recently got a cell phone, however, I had left it downstairs. Thomas had not barked at all, which was kind of strange, but overall he was a pretty quiet dog and wouldn't always bark at strangers. I didn't know what I could do, so I tried to stay hidden in my bedroom. At first, I heard nothing from the intruder. I couldn't hardly hear anything from downstairs unless it was really loud though, like a door opening or closing. However, about 5 minutes later or so, I heard the man coming up the stairs. That's when things got intense. I was really nervous, and I literally hid underneath my bed. As the footsteps went down the hallway, they approached my room. They did not immediately go to it, but I heard another door being opened. Things were quiet for a while, and then I heard the footsteps again. I was kicking myself for forgetting my cell phone downstairs, or else I could have called the cops. The footsteps then made their way to right outside my door before the intruder turned the handle. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. He seemed to stay at the door for a few more seconds, which felt like a really long time. Then he walked further down the hallway. I heard another door open, and I thought about making a run for it, but ultimately chickened out. The man went in another room for a little while. Then I finally heard him walking away down the hallway. Soon after, he went back down the stairs. I felt a little better, but I was still too scared to come out from under my bed, and I was way too scared to leave my bedroom. I had no idea if he had left the house or was still in it because I couldn't hear much downstairs, and hiding under my bed, I heard even less. More time went by and things remained quiet. Finally, I got up. I still couldn't leave my bedroom though. My parents got home a little while later, and I finally left my bedroom at that point and ran downstairs. I told them about it and the police were called, but the man was gone. He must have quietly left at some point. The cops searched up and down, and other than the back door still being unlocked, there was no sign of him even being there. Nothing was stolen or out of place. It was really weird. I'm not sure if the man ever saw me or knew that I was there, because when I saw him, he wasn't looking at me, and I'm not sure why he entered our house, but I'm just glad that he left and that my door had a lock on it. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. My grandma would drop me off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home around 4:30 p.m. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even get dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. That day, it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. Nobody should have been home there until about 7 p.m. My house is set up to where the upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. Nobody that I knew drove a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways like he owned the place. When I looked out of the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so nobody should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to the front door. I thought that maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or somebody who my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if somebody was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door. I went to my other window that had a better view of the walkway up to the front door. I saw the guy walking back down the walkway. I switched to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I was relaying all of this to Seth with my mic still on. The man walked past his truck and tried to open my garage side door. At that point, my heart sank. I told Seth that this guy tried to get into my house. Mind you, it was literally broad day at like 5 p.m. Luckily, the garage side door was locked because sometimes we forgot to lock it. After he tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran downstairs to see what he was doing. I got downstairs and stood behind the wall so I wouldn't be visible to the back door or living room windows. I just listened. I heard him trying to open the door. Then I heard a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I was more scared than I had ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross the living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner, and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I was telling him this, I heard a car door shut. This time when I looked out the window, he finally got back into his truck. I looked at the truck closer and noticed the only things he had in his truck were a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate, but he was parked where I couldn't see it. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I got to the back door and saw that the doormat was moved. Both large plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key, and we did have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch, and all those pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I could have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. This story takes place 2 years ago when I lived alone in this house that I was renting. It was in a quiet neighborhood, but it also had a lot of other houses in it pretty close by. So one night I worked late and arrived back home at about 8 or 9 o'clock p.m. I went inside and after changing I decided to cook something to eat. I went into the kitchen which was located at the back side of the house. There I began to cook, which is something that I enjoy doing when I have the time. As I was right in the middle of this, I heard a knock on my front door. I stopped and wondered who it could be. It was late, so it automatically seemed weird. The only way to find out though was to go and look. So I paused my cooking and walked over to the front of the house. There I glanced out of a window to see who it was before I decided to open the door. When I looked, I saw a man standing there at the step. He was wearing a hood that was covering most of his head, so I couldn't really see his face. In fact, it made him look pretty sketchy because it also wasn't that cold out or raining or anything. And overall, if you want people to open the door for you late at night, maybe don't be hunched over wearing a hood. I thought, I'm not answering, and I walked back over to the kitchen. Literally right as I was walking over there though, I heard the doorbell ring. This was different than before because before he had knocked. I just ignored it though. I was curious as to what he wanted, but I figured that it wasn't worth trying to find out. I was still fairly new to my neighborhood in that particular area of the city, so I didn't know quite how common crime was, and I thought it best to just leave it alone. I resumed my cooking, and the guy did knock one more time. It was like 2 or 3 minutes after he had rang the doorbell. This I also ignored. I wasn't sure if he knew that I was home or not. I had a few lights on, but not all of them, so it wasn't super bright or anything. It made me think that he did know I was home though, based on how he rang the doorbell right as I was walking away. Still, after the second time he knocked, it stopped, so I figured that he had gone away and I felt better. In fact, like 5 minutes after I last heard the knocking, I quickly walked back over and looked out the window. He was in fact gone, and then I returned to the kitchen. I went back to cooking, but this only lasted for about 5 minutes, because then, out of nowhere, I saw him again. There was a window in the kitchen that was pretty much right in front of me. It looked out to my tiny backyard, which was fenced in. I suddenly saw this guy appear right on the other side of the window, walking towards it. Then he looked right at me and knocked on the glass. It scared me, and I quickly ran out of the room. This guy was a big problem now. I went into the living room and got out my phone, ready to call the police. I didn't hear the guy knocking again or anything though. So after calming down for a minute, I walked back into the kitchen carefully. I looked to the window and didn't see him. Then I went closer and I looked to the backyard and confirmed that the man was now gone. I went around looking out all the windows, and thankfully he was nowhere to be seen. I was really creeped out though. I still didn't know what the guy wanted, but hoped that he was harmless. Maybe he was just mad that I didn't answer the front door for him. So then he possibly walked into the backyard and knocked on the window just to spite me. Then he left. That was my hope. But what was he doing at my front door in the first place? Either way, I was just glad that he was now gone, and I decided to hold off on calling the cops. I was finally able to finish my cooking after that with no disturbances. I went into the living room to eat, and then relax and have a nice evening. I hung out in the living room for a while until I got tired. After that, I got ready for bed and went into my bedroom to go to sleep. So I remember that I fell asleep only to randomly wake up in the middle of the night. I woke up and then sat up to check the time. When I saw that it was 1 a.m., I was happy because that meant I could sleep for a long more time. I was about to lay back down to return to sleep, but before I did, I noticed something out the window. It was somebody walking past it. They were not that close to it, but I still saw them. I got up and walked closer to it. They were walking in the backyard. When I looked out of it this time, I saw the same guy. He was back. Now he was walking through my backyard towards the kitchen window again. This time I didn't hesitate and I took out my phone and I called the police. I told them what was happening and they said they would send somebody over. I went into the front of my house away from the back and waited. The guy didn't immediately try to break in or anything. I didn't know where he was though, but I didn't want to look. I didn't think it would be a good idea to confront him. The police got there really fast. It was probably like 2 minutes. When they arrived, they found the man still in the backyard. He was caught, but they could not arrest him. Apparently, they just gave him a warning or something. He hadn't broken in, and it couldn't be proven that he was going to, but he was trespassing. He claimed that he was lost, and then I was also told that he thought his friend lived at my place and it was just a mistake. I don't really believe it though, because he saw me in the window earlier that night and then still came back. I personally don't know what his intentions were. I never talked to him, but he was pretty much told to stay away or he would be arrested. After that, thankfully he did. But I still wonder what his plans were and what could have happened had I answered the door for him. This happened when I was much younger. I believe I was about 12 years old or so. I remember that one night I found myself home alone. My parents were gone someplace, and my older sister went to her friend's house. This didn't happen very often where I would be home by myself, because I remember thinking to myself that it felt strange that the house was so quiet with nobody else there. I was inside of my bedroom doing homework, which I remember I had a lot of. It was about 8 o'clock or so and dark out when there was a knock at the front door. Immediately, it seemed strange to me. We didn't get too many door-to-door salesmen or anything like that. Still, I got up from my chair, left the room, and walked over to the front door. I remember that I didn't even bother to look out of a window to see who it was or anything. I just opened up the front door to whoever was there. A man stood on the front step and said hi. He was somewhat tall and thin from my memory and had darkish hair. The man asked if my parents were home, and I said no. I figured he was some type of salesman or something. After I told him that my parents were not home though, he did not immediately leave. He kept standing there, and then he asked if he could come inside. I told him no, and the guy didn't say anything right away after that. So I remember that I just closed the door and then locked it. I thought that it was really weird. I then went to the window and looked out. I saw the man walking away back down the driveway. Then I went back to my bedroom to continue with my homework. It didn't take long for me to get really focused. But then just about 10 minutes later, I heard another noise. It sounded like somebody was trying to open the back door to the house. I did not get up to go look though. I was too scared. I stayed in my bedroom and listened. The noises didn't last very long though, and soon things became quiet. That's when I decided to get up and go look. I really didn't know what was going on at the time. I was hoping that it was just my imagination or something with a logical explanation, but I think that I also knew that was kind of unlikely. When I left my bedroom and went down the hallway and towards the living room, I then entered the dining room at the back end of the house. It was there that I noticed through a window the same man who had been at the door. He was now standing in the backyard. I quickly turned and ran back to my bedroom. I don't think that the man saw me. When I got back to my room, I got the phone and I called the police. I reported the guy for trying to enter the house, and then I hid in my bedroom. I just remembered that I went under my covers and I didn't hear or see anything for what felt like a long time. Eventually, the police got there. They actually found the guy hiding in the backyard behind the shed when they arrived. I really thought that he would have left. I didn't know who the guy was, and my parents and sister didn't either. I'm really glad that he was not able to get inside of the house. My mother was a head night shift nurse for a rich health clinic where people would pay thousands of dollars to stay for 6 weeks to cure them of whatever illness. It was also in the middle of nowhere on 600 acres of land. The crazy thing about this place, though, was since it had a lot of wilderness, it was known to have a lot of strange activity. I don't think that's related, but here's my story of when we lived there. This happened when I was 12 years old. Our one-story home was at the top of a hill where there was only one other house not too far from us. My mom, like every night, would drive her car to the clinic, which was roughly a little more than a mile away. You could always tell when she would be coming or leaving, because there wasn't any pavement and it was strictly rocks and gravel, so the car would be extremely loud in the dead quiet of night. Earlier in the week, she had lost her main set of keys and had been using her spare. That night, I was sitting in my bedroom playing PlayStation, when all of a sudden I got a heavy mental push to turn everything on. I turned off all the lights, faced the wall, and pretended that I was sleeping. My heart was racing for no reason since I was just laying there in bed, but no more than 5 minutes later, I heard my front door open, yet I didn't hear any car drive up. Our house was small with wooden floors. From the entrance, I heard heavy footsteps slowly walking through the living room, as if whoever was there was searching for something. They continued to walk into the kitchen, which my room was directly connected to. They turned a light on in the kitchen. At this point, my heart was pounding so hard, but my mental urge was screaming at me to not move or make a sound. The steps walked through the kitchen and stopped at the entrance overlooking where I was fake sleeping. It felt like an eternity as I helplessly laid there with my eyes closed, focused on not moving while this person just stared at me. After who knows how long, the person slowly walked out of my home and left. I waited anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes before moving, just in case they were waiting for me to get up and turn the lights on in the house. I called my mom to see if she had randomly stopped home. She said no, and I told her what happened. We ended up changing the locks and adding a bar lock. I think a guardian angel was watching over me, because there was no reason for me to suddenly want to go to bed that quickly other than the feeling that I had. It was so strange because it wasn't that late, like 11 p.m., and it was summertime, so I didn't have to wake up for school. Nothing was missing from the house that we knew of. We think someone found my mom's keys, but exactly who, we have no idea, because they would not have known where we lived and if those keys were hers. That was one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me, but there were so many stories from when we lived in that area that I could tell. Just a creepy area in general. When my brother and I were around 12 years old, in like 2006, we were at my dad and stepmom's house in the afternoon, probably around 3 p.m., so still broad daylight. My brother and I were the only two people home because my dad, stepmom, and younger siblings were in a nearby town for their youth soccer game. The two of us were lounging in my dad's room, which was located at the back of the house, and watching a movie when we heard a knock on the front door. My brother and I grew up with our single mom, and we were latchkey kids, so being home alone and having people stop by wasn't concerning or weird for us, especially back in those days where it was more common for friends to drop by your house to see if you were home, since not every kid had a cell phone to keep in touch. But on this day, we were at my dad's house like I said, and I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, so the knock on the door was weird since none of our friends or relatives lived nearby to come over randomly. Both of us wanted to ignore the knocking and wait for the person to go away. But being latchkey kids in a house where it wasn't normal for people to stop by unexpectedly, my instinct was to go and make sure that the door was locked. We knew better than to go out and make our presence known, and we for sure were not going to open the door. But in my mind, there was no getting around one of us going to make sure nothing was unlocked. I knew my brother, and I could tell that he wasn't going to do it, so I volunteered because it was an overwhelming priority. I got up and stealthily creeped down the hallway leading from my dad's room to the front door. There was a window next to the door, so I crouched around and very carefully peeked between the blinds before I reached out, twisting the door lock as silently as I could. It had been unlocked, so I'm very glad that I went to check. When I was peeking out the window, I saw a middle-aged man, slim and tall but not huge. He was bald on the top, with some short salt and pepper hair wrapping around the sides of his head. He had his hands behind his back. I can't recall if it was one hand or both, and in one of his hands was a metal object that I took for a knife, but to this day I can't say for sure what he was holding. He did not see me looking at him through the window, or if he did, he at least didn't look at me and let me know that he knew I was there. The way our house was designed, the front door was not visible from the street because there were bushes and tall trees blocking it. My 12-year-old heart sank knowing this random guy was at the door with what I thought was a knife behind his back, or at the very least a metal object that the man felt was necessary to put behind his back. It was especially terrifying because I recognized it was not super unrealistic since the man would not be visible from the street, and therefore he could hide something behind his back without worrying about the neighbors' cars passing by seeing him. This house would be a good target for somebody looking to do bad stuff, since you'd be shielded from being seen. At this point, normal paranoia became full-on fight-or-flight panic mode. It was like a switch was flipped from me just checking to see if the door was locked, to thinking there was a guy with a knife at the door who wanted to kill us. I creeped back to my dad's room and told my brother what I'd seen. He grabbed the house phone. I can't remember if there was one in my dad's room or if he had to go to another room, but before long he was speaking with my dad on the phone. My dad immediately instructed us to let his dog, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, in from the backyard. Let me tell you, in a situation of pure terror, having a big loud dog was the only bit of hope and relief. From there, my brother and I locked ourselves in a bathroom by the front door, not sure why we decided to hide in the closest room to the guy outside. But from inside the bathroom we called 911 while my brother clutched a kitchen knife, both of us crying and struggling to get words out to the operator. While in the bathroom, I heard the front door handle being twisted around, which would have meant that the guy was now trying to enter the house. The bathroom was only about 7 feet from the front door, so I could hear it loud and clear. I have such a vivid memory of us huddling in that bathroom, feeling truly helpless and out of control of what might happen next, with the only comfort being the noise of the dog barking at the front door. If the guy decided to kick the door down, he'd have to deal with a big dog and then have a knife fight with 2 kids. I was really hoping that the dog would hold it down for us, because I didn't like our odds if the man at the door got past him. Before long, the cops arrived, and shortly after, my dad and stepmom got home too. The guy was gone by then, and nothing ever came of it. To this day, my dad's theory is that the guy at the door was his neighbor coming over to complain, because apparently his dog would always bark at the neighbor while he was doing yard work. So my dad thinks the neighbor was trimming the bushes, and therefore just happened to have clippers or something in his hands when he came over to complain. Sounds reasonable enough, but I wish I had asked at the time to see the neighbor, because then I could truly identify him and know what the situation was. Personally, I'm open to my dad's theory, but it always seemed to me that my dad clung to it more for his own comfort, since the alternative would have been a parent's nightmare. If it were the neighbor though, some things didn't make sense. Like the guy conveniently showing up when no cars were in my dad's driveway since they left to go to the soccer game only 20 minutes prior. Seems like coming over when it appeared nobody was home would be a weird thing if you expected your neighbor to answer the door. Also, the guy trying to twist the handle was not a very neighborly act, trying to enter someone else's home while they're gone. Either way, whether the threat was real or imagined by my brother and I, it was very scary, especially if I hadn't got there in time to lock the door. This is something that happened not too long ago. I live alone in a smaller house that I'm renting. It's in what I would describe as a pretty average neighborhood. I've lived here for a little over a year and have gotten used to things. So one night it was getting late and I was about to go to bed. The time was about 10 o'clock and I went upstairs to where my bedroom is. All the lights in the house were off and I literally just crawled into bed to sleep. But before I could close my eyes though, I heard a knock at my front door. This was instantly weird. Why would somebody be at the door so late at night? I didn't know. So I got up out of bed, annoyed, and walked down the stairs and then went over to the front door. It took a little while to get down there obviously, but when I did, there was nobody there. I was confused and looked out the window into my front yard, driveway, and the street. There was nobody in sight. So I figured that either whoever knocked had lost patience waiting for me pretty quick, or else maybe it was a prank. Possibly some kids playing ding-dong ditch. I was annoyed by the whole thing, but I went up to my bedroom to finally go to sleep now. However, literally as soon as I was about to get into bed again, there was more knocking at the front door. At this point, I was convinced that it had to be a prank. The timing seemed too perfect. So I sprinted downstairs and then went over to the front door again. Once more, they were gone. Whoever had knocked was nowhere in sight. This time I decided to wait around for a bit and see if whoever was there would return. So I stayed by the window but tried to keep myself hidden. As I waited, I was expecting to see someone return to my property, probably some teenage kid or something, but nobody came back. I stayed there watching for like 15 minutes and then decided to go to sleep. I figured that they would not come back, and I went up and went to bed. This time I was actually able to fall asleep. However, I was woken up in the night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and as soon as I awoke, I heard the sound of someone banging on my front door. Not just knocking like it was before, but this time it was like the person was trying to knock my door down. And it wasn't just one steady set of knocking, it was almost constant banging. I got up out of bed, and this time felt nervous to go down and see who was there based on the loud bangs. But still, I went down the stairs to look. When I was just about at the bottom of the stairs, they stopped, and by the time I got there, once again, the person was gone. There was nobody there. I stayed by the window and looked around. I could not believe how I kept missing this person, whoever they were. As I stayed there though, about a minute later, I saw a car slowly drive by down my street. It was a pretty average looking sedan, and there was nothing that stood out about it. Plus, I could not see anything about the driver because of it being nighttime and dark out. But the car drove by really slow and then was out of sight. And my street is normally very quiet, especially at that time of night, so I think that was the person who was knocking on my door, but obviously I can't confirm that. After that, I stayed by the window a little while longer, and then eventually went back upstairs and went to sleep. I was not woken up again that night by knocking or anything, and the next day things were fine. That was a few weeks ago, and nothing strange has happened since, but I still have many questions about that. Who was knocking on my door, and why? It was so crazy how I kept missing them and never saw who did it. It's like they knew when I was going downstairs, and maybe they could hear me with it being so late, I'm not sure. But I'm wondering if that car that drove by was in fact the culprit. I'm hoping that it was just somebody pulling a prank on me and it's an innocent joke. But the fact that they knocked twice at 10 o'clock and then came back 4 hours later at 2 a.m. is really creepy. Plus, the way they were banging on my door that last time was really bad, and I seriously wondered if they were trying to break in. I'm wondering if this person will come back. I'm hoping not, but I will keep you posted. This happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago now. I was in my later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay in a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At the time, my family lived on the East Coast in a city that was not the greatest. The crime rate was fairly high, and just a lot of sketchy things would happen. That particular weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. I planned on playing some PlayStation on the big screen TV with friends, then order a late takeout dinner of either pizza or Chinese, and hang out watching TV late into the night. My older dog Cecil would spend the whole night on the couch with me just relaxing also. Cecil was an old beagle who had been in our family for 8 years. He was quiet, peaceful, and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. At approximately 1 a.m., I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I heard a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who's lived in a city knows that noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I heard another bang, and Cecil did something I've never seen him do before. He leaped off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of a German Shepherd canine unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through my dog's barking, I could now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old, rusted, and was hard to open, even with a key. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Living in a bad neighborhood, I had learned and heard people say that if someone tries to get into your house and they move on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. But if somebody is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well then, they might be more dangerous. Knowing this, I rushed upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I kept under my bed for situations like this. Then I headed down to my basement. I probably should have run or called the cops, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus I had nowhere to go. While I was heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil went right past me. Suddenly, on the other side of the door, I heard a man's voice say some curse words, and the banging stopped as he ran away, hearing the aggressive dog barking. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with the wood bat in my hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to check it out, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting into my house, but old Cecil scared him off. My fat, lazy old dog could have very well saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss Cecil's actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But I will tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that the door was going to give in soon. It was a Thursday night, I think. I had just gotten home from work at around 8:30 p.m. I remember I was tired, my feet were sore, and I had been looking forward to a hot shower all day. None of my roommates were home. 2 were studying at the library, and the other one had gone home for the weekend. I always lock the front door behind me. It's a habit now. Our apartment isn't in the best part of town, and the complex has had some issues. Nothing serious, just sketchy people walking around at night mostly. I was maybe 10 minutes into my shower when I heard the front door open. At first, I thought maybe one of the girls had come back early. I waited, listening, but didn't hear any voices, just footsteps. Not heavy ones, just the soft, slow kind that make you feel weird when you hear them. I turned the water off so I could hear better. The bathroom fan was still humming, but I could hear somebody walking. I wrapped myself in a towel and opened the bathroom door just a crack. There was a man in our apartment. I only saw the back of him. He had just walked in like he belonged there. He looked around like he was scoping the place out, but he hadn't seen me yet. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it. It made a loud sound. I think it startled him because I heard him freeze. I didn't have my phone, no clothes, nothing. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him leave as the front door opened and closed. I stayed in there for a long time. Eventually, I ran to my room and grabbed my phone. I texted one of my roommates. I told her someone just came in and I didn't know who they were. She thought maybe they had stolen something, but I didn't think so. I hadn't heard anything move or break. They were just looking. I did catch them basically right as they came in. I called the non-emergency police number, but I didn't have much to tell them. I didn't see his face, so I couldn't describe him. I didn't know if the door had been picked or if the lock didn't work great and he just pushed it open. I wouldn't be surprised since our apartment isn't new or in great shape. All I knew is that somebody came inside and I had been alone. I keep thinking about what could have happened. If I had still been in the shower when he reached the bathroom, or if I hadn't heard him and came out of the bathroom fully while he was there, or if he had been closer to me and I hadn't slammed the door fast enough. None of us really feel safe anymore. We've started checking the door multiple times a day. One roommate carries a taser now and another has a knife. We've only lived there for 3 months, and 2 bad things have already happened. This happened back when I was 12 years old. It was the summertime, and I was at home by myself. Both of my parents were at work, and this was probably in the late morning. I just remember that it was a really nice day outside, so I went into the front yard, and I was reading a book in a chair that we had out there. After probably an hour of this, I remember noticing a car driving down our street. A few cars had already gone by that I had noticed. We lived on a quiet street that wouldn't get very much traffic, mostly just people who lived there. This one car in particular was going very slow. It was a black 4-door sedan, and after passing by, it went further down my street and then out of sight. I didn't think too much of it, but only about a minute later or so, I remember the car driving back from the other way. When it passed by our house, it seemed to slow down even more than it was already going. I also did not recognize the car, and I couldn't help but feel a little bit suspicious. The car ended up moving on and leaving the street though. At this point, I was hoping that it was just somebody who was maybe lost, so I stayed outside and kept reading. However, less than 5 minutes later, the car was back. It once again drove by and was going very slowly. I just had a bad feeling about it. The car luckily passed me by and continued down the street. When it did, I decided to go inside of the house. After getting inside, I think I went to the kitchen to get something to drink. I was going to go to my bedroom, but before that, I stopped at the front window. When I did, I saw the same car sitting in our driveway. I couldn't believe it. The car was parked at the back end of the driveway, and I could not see who was behind the wheel. But I did see somebody in the driver's seat, and it appeared to be a man. I watched the car, and it continued to sit there. Nobody got out. I didn't really know what to do, but I remember that I soon moved away from the window. I walked around the house. I don't really remember why, but when I returned to the front window, I could see that the car was now empty. The man had left it. I didn't know where he had gone though. I looked to the front step, and nobody was there, so he wasn't going to knock at the door or anything. I went to another front window and looked out, but saw nothing there either. At that time, I was trying to figure out what he could possibly be doing. I couldn't think of any logical explanation though. I went to go back to my bedroom. When I got inside though, I saw the man at my window just outside of it. We locked eyes for a brief moment before I quickly ran away. I ran into the kitchen to get the phone and call 911. However, when I did, I saw the man running away past another window. He then went around the house and back to his car. As I was calling the police, I could hear him driving away. I went through with the call anyways though. The police came out to our house, and I spoke with them for a while, telling them everything that I could. My parents got called and came home from work early. It was one of the craziest moments of my life. I'm really glad that the man was unable to get inside. After that, I never saw him again.
This happened not that long ago. It's something that's really crazy, and I'm sure that I will never forget. So it was a normal night, and I was relaxing on the couch watching a movie. For some background, I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. I used to have a roommate, but she moved out after the lease ended. However, I decided to renew the lease and just live there by myself because I could afford it. I didn't feel like moving all my stuff to another unit, and I decided to just use the extra room as my office, as well as some extra space to store all my stuff. The apartment is on the 3rd floor of the building, which was built in 2018. On this day, I had gone to work like normal, went to the gym, and then came home. I hadn't left after that. So there I was, sitting on the couch, watching a movie. It was getting to be pretty late at night. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of things falling down coming from the other room. It sounded like from my office, possibly inside the closet in there, but there was also a chance that it could have been from the hallway or from another person's apartment. It happened pretty fast, and the sound lasted for a total of maybe 2 seconds. Instantly, I was nervous, but I told myself that I was just being scared for no reason. I wanted to go look, but was too scared to. Other than the living room, all the lights were off in my apartment. I didn't hear any other noises, so I figured there was just stuff falling over. I did have a good amount of junk in the closet. I didn't know why it would just randomly fall though, but it was definitely a possibility. I procrastinated going to look and kept watching the movie. However, I was getting more and more creeped out, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep that night unless I went and confirmed that nothing was there. It might sound crazy, and I certainly thought that it was, but I still felt paranoid. What on earth could it be other than just junk falling though? So I decided to go and look. I psyched myself up and then walked over to the office. I turned on the light in the hallway and then turned on the light to the office. At first, everything seemed fine. I didn't hear any noises or see anything. Then I walked in and went to the closet. The door was closed. It was a pretty large closet, nothing crazy, but you could easily walk in. When I opened the closet door, it was dark in there, but I instantly saw a man. As soon as I did, I just took off running. I could not believe it, and everything I did next was just a reaction. I ran to my front door and left my apartment. Thank God I still had my phone on me. I ran out into the hallways and called the police. I told them some guy was in my apartment. Then I walked around the hallways in a daze until they arrived. I was freaking out because I honestly did not expect that at all. When the police arrived, they entered my apartment. Surprisingly, the man was still in there. He was arrested, and I had never seen him before. He would not say how he got in or why he was there. I'm just glad that he was gone. But I never did find out how he got in. I mean, it makes no sense. My place is on the 3rd floor, and the only entrance is the door. I must have somehow forgot to lock it or something. Maybe the lock is broken. I really don't know. What I also don't know is how long he was in there for. I'm going to be creeped out about this for a long time. I'm just glad that I didn't get hurt or anything. It was around 8 p.m. on a Tuesday when this happened. I was at home alone with my 3 dogs, just lounging on the couch watching TV. The house was quiet except for the occasional bark from my dogs as they moved around the room. I was on FaceTime with my friend, and we were chatting about nothing important, just filling the time. Then I heard something. At first, it was faint, like a rustling sound coming from the backyard. My dogs immediately perked up and started barking towards the back door. I muted the TV and turned towards the window to look outside. I watched as a man approached my sliding glass door. He stopped and stood there, facing my back door, looking right at me through the glass. The dogs were going wild by this point, barking and growling. Even with the dogs barking at him from the other side of the glass, the man didn't move. He didn't even look towards them or acknowledge them, just stared through the glass directly at me. I told my friend on the line what was happening, and she urged me to hang up on her and call the cops, which I did. The man didn't move, and my dogs kept barking, but he didn't seem bothered at all. His eyes never left mine as he smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. He also kept mouthing something at me through the glass. I'm not the greatest lip reader, but to me it seemed like he was mouthing, "Don't look away," over and over again. I just sat there staring back at him, waiting for the cops to arrive. It was so unsettling, but I didn't want to leave the room and lose sight of him. So I would know right away if he began to try to break into my house. The man never did anything else though. The whole time he just stood there staring at me with that eerie smile, his mouth repeating those words, "Don't look away." Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard the sirens in the distance. I was hoping that the cops wouldn't use their sirens so that maybe the man would be caught. The cops were pulling outside, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it with their lights and sirens, including the man outside my sliding door. He took off, and the cops couldn't find him nearby. I haven't been home alone since then, and I never want to go through that again. Every time I look out that back door now, I picture the man standing there staring at me. This happened around summer or fall of 2018, and at the time I was 15 years old. My family was out on a trip, and I was home alone for the weekend. When my parents left, I had mixed emotions of happiness and worry, because this was my first time home alone. That night it was around 10 p.m., and I had gone downstairs to feed my dog, and I realized that my back door was wide open. This wasn't unusual because I normally leave it open for my dog to run around outside, and my back garden is fenced off, so I normally don't worry. After feeding my dog, I closed the door and locked it. When I went back upstairs, I thought I heard a noise of shuffling somewhere around my house, but I just shrugged it off as my dog getting into her bed. I live on the 3rd floor of the house, so I have to get up on a ladder to get into my room. I sat there playing games for a couple of hours, and I was about to go to sleep at around 1 a.m., but I decided to get food before sleeping. As I entered the kitchen, I found the kitchen door open a bit, but not fully open enough for a person to fit through. I dismissed it as bad memory, thinking that I had forgotten to close it. Walking through the living room, I saw my dog seated in a corner looking scared and worried. For context, my dog is a small French bulldog incapable of hurting anyone, so seeing her like this worried me a bit. But sometimes she gets scared at little things or nothing at all, so I didn't think anything about it really. Fast forward to me being back upstairs. I felt myself drifting off while watching some random TV show I can't remember, when I heard my downstairs stairs creak. I started drifting off again until at one point I fell completely asleep. I remember waking up to a sound, not even sure what it was, but I just woke up. I slowly opened my eyes, and to my absolute horror, I saw a man with half his body peering through the hatch leading up to my room. Somehow I managed not to scream, and I pretended that I was sleeping and didn't see anything. I would say it was about 30 seconds before I heard the creak of my ladder as the man went down the ladder, but honestly it felt like hours. As I heard the door close to my brother's room, which you must walk through to get to the stairs to go back down to the 1st level, I reached for my phone and dialed the police. Surprisingly, it took them only a few minutes to show up at my house, and they did a quick sweep of the house to no avail. I slept at my grandma's for the rest of the night and the rest of the weekend, but I didn't get much sleep anyways. From then on, I was too scared to be home alone at all, and I always remember to lock my doors now. This happened a couple of years ago, and even now I still think about it sometimes. It started slowly, just weird stuff happening around our house, but it built up into one of the scariest moments that I've ever had. We lived in a 3-story home, and my family tends to stay up late. One night, around 3 a.m., my uncle stepped outside to throw out the trash, but later he told us that as soon as he got out there, he felt this strong sense of being watched. He looked around and saw my mom's van parked in the driveway. The darkness around it was thick, but he was sure that he saw somebody sitting inside. The windows were tinted, so he couldn't make it out clearly, but the feeling was strong enough that it stayed with him. Around that same time, my mom started noticing weird stuff with her car. Things moved around, random items were missing, and one day she found a beer bottle inside it. She knew it didn't belong to any of us. She used to leave her car unlocked because we all trusted the neighborhood, but after that she started locking it every time. I slept on the 3rd floor, and my window faced the front of the house. At night, I started hearing sounds, light footsteps and distinct clicking from outside. We had cement stairs leading up to our front porch, but a few of the steps were loose, and when somebody stepped on them, they made a loud, specific sound. You can't really mistake it for anything else. At first, I assumed it was my other uncle who's younger and goes out to party or club almost every night. He comes home at all hours, so late night noises were not that weird. But something about these sounds felt different, a lot slower, almost like whoever it was trying not to be heard. That's what started to bother me. One night, after watching a scary movie, I didn't want to sleep alone, so I made a little spot on the floor in my grandma's room. She had a security monitor with a feed showing our driveway. I glanced at it while trying to fall asleep, and I saw something that made me really scared. A tall man was standing at the edge of the camera's view, just standing there. I blinked a few times thinking that maybe I was imagining it, but he didn't go away. I grabbed my phone and messaged our family group chat to ask if anybody had just gotten home, because sometimes people do come in late. But everybody responded saying that they were either already inside or still out. I looked back at the monitor. He was gone. That moment stuck with me, but nothing else happened right away. Then came the day I will never forget. It was about a month later. I had stayed home from school and was the only one in the house. Everyone else was at work or in class. It was a quiet afternoon, around 2 p.m., and I was just lying in bed scrolling TikTok when I heard a man's voice and the faint hum of a small engine. I looked out my window and saw a golf cart parked in our driveway with a man in a blue shirt standing next to it. He didn't look especially threatening, but there was something about him that felt off. None of our family's cars were home, and nobody was supposed to be visiting. I tried calling my mom, who works at a hospital, but she didn't answer. So I called my stepdad and asked him if somebody was supposed to be coming by. He said no. I told him what I saw, and his voice got serious. He told me to keep watching and to let him know if there were any updates. Not long after, my mom called back. The moment I explained it to her, she told me to call the police right away. I called 911 and told them everything. The dispatcher told me to hide, but before I did, I had this terrible feeling. I wasn't sure if anybody had locked the doors before leaving that morning, so I ran downstairs. The front door was locked, but when I got to the back door, it was wide open. I slammed it shut and locked it as fast as I could, and almost immediately after I shut it, the doorknob began rattling hard. Someone was trying to get in. I looked back and saw him. He was shirtless, tall, and not the same man I had seen in the driveway by the golf cart. He looked skinnier and just off, like something wasn't right with him. He was yanking the handle like he had just missed getting in. I honestly felt like he knew I had just locked it. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, locked myself in my parents' room, and stayed on the phone with the 911 dispatcher the whole time. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. Every second felt like forever. The police arrived a few minutes later to search the house and the property, but there was no one there. No man in a blue shirt, no shirtless guy, and best of all, no signs of a break-in. They reviewed the security footage, but it didn't show anything helpful. The man in the driveway had stayed far from the camera's center, and the back angle was too dark to catch anything clearly. Just weird movement on the edges. It was like they knew exactly where not to be seen. To this day, I still don't know who they were or if they were working together. Was one of them watching while the other one tried to get in? I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes I do. And what if I hadn't locked the back door on time? Just a few weeks ago, I went back to visit the neighborhood after we had moved. I looked down our old street and saw a golf cart. Same sound, same shape, same look. I didn't wait around to see who was driving it. This happened when I was in high school. I'm a male and was 14 years old at the time. I lived at home with my parents, and one Thursday afternoon, I got home from school at the usual time. Normally, both of my parents would be gone for a few hours after I got home from school. They would both still be at work, and they worked in the city. So on this afternoon, I had a little bit of homework to do, but not that much. I went up to my bedroom to get it out of the way. My room was upstairs in the house and on the back side of it. As I sat up there doing my work, about 20 minutes into it, I heard a car pulling into our driveway. I thought that it was either my mom or dad arriving home early from work. I paused what I was doing and got up to go downstairs and say hi. However, after getting to the main level of the house, I looked out of the front window to see a random car in the driveway. I had never seen it before. It was a fairly large SUV, like a Chevy Tahoe, and was black in color. Right after I noticed it, I saw the doors open up, and 4 men got out while one stayed in the driver's seat. At that point, I moved back quickly and away from the window. I had never seen any of these men before and didn't know who they were, but they were all headed towards the house, and they didn't look that friendly either. It just looked sketchy. The men did not go to the front door though. Instead, I noticed through a side window that they were going around towards the backyard. Then the car that was in the driveway backed up and left. I ran back to my room at that point to get my phone. When I did, I looked out of the window and saw the men all going towards the woods in our backyard. We had a large woods mostly on our property that was towards the back end of it. After all the men entered the woods, they were completely out of my sight. I called my parents and they both said that they were on their way home but stuck in traffic. They told me to call the police, so I did. A while later, the cops arrived and I told them everything that I could. They searched the yard and the woods a little, but the men must have left because they didn't find them. After that, my parents got home, and soon after, the cops left. Nobody really seemed to know who the men could be or what exactly they were doing. I was just really glad that they were gone. So then, fast forward to the very next day. I got home from school again, and much like the previous day, I was home alone. My parents were not back from work yet, and I went up to my bedroom where I usually hung out. As I was in there, I noticed something out of my window though. I saw one of the men from the previous day. He was standing in our backyard just outside of the woods, and he appeared to be looking up at me. It creeped me out so bad. I instantly ducked down and then called the police again. They came out once more and searched the property again. However, just like the previous day, they didn't find anybody. After that though, I never saw those men again. I still don't know what exactly was going on there. Who were those guys, and why did they go in our woods? It remains a mystery to this day.
I was home alone between school and work one day. I was 17 at the time, and my mom was at work. I was doing my makeup and hair for work, eating some food, and watching some TV before I had to head out. Suddenly, I heard a loud knocking at what I thought at the time was the door. At this point, it was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. My mom occasionally came home for lunch around this time, so I figured it was her at the door since I parked crooked in front of the garage. I heard the knocking again and hurried out of my room, figuring she was angry since she always tells me not to block the garage. I got to the peephole and looked out, but she was not there. Confused, I went to grab my phone to call her to ask if she needed me to move my car. To set the scene a little, my front door opens into the living room. Then it's a super open living room and kitchen area. So walking from the front door to my room, I could see out the big window in the kitchen. I heard the loud knock again, and this time realized that it was coming from the window, but I didn't see anything since the curtains and blinds were covering it up. A few months prior to this, we saw some younger teenage boys messing around our backyard. In all seriousness, I figured it was them again, so I went to open the window to tell them to go before I called their parents. Once I opened the blinds, my heart dropped. All I saw was the corner of a black t-shirt and the arm of a man. It was very obvious that it wasn't the 12 to 14-year-olds that we saw earlier that week. It was a grown man. I grabbed my dogs, ran into my room, and locked the door. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops. I just called my mom on my way to work. Let's just say my mom was beyond freaked out and scared of what could have happened to me. The next day, she looked at our neighborhood app. The first post was an update on the string of robberies throughout the neighborhood. The guys come dressed in all black, get into your backyard, pound on your windows waiting to see if someone's home, and if not, they break in or pick the lock. Up until I opened the blinds, I didn't look outside or answer the doors whatsoever. If I hadn't decided to check that time, they most likely would have broken in. Basically, in this post on the app,
They stated that the men had finally been caught that morning. The same day after knocking on my windows, 30 minutes after seeing me and leaving my house, they broke into a house in the neighborhood next to ours, which had a security system that silently alerted the authorities. My mom put up cameras all throughout the front and backyard after that incident. I still get freaked out thinking about what would have happened if I didn't open the blinds and if those men broke into my house.
This happened back when I was in college. I was a freshman and living in the freshman dorms. It was a large dorm building and my floor was all female. I had my own dorm room, which was very nice because I didn't have to share it with a roommate. Other than the little bit of extra space though, it was a pretty typical college dorm room. The university that I went to was large and I quickly made a good number of friends. It became a normal routine for me to spend time with my new college friends quite a bit. We would do homework and study together and hang out on the weekends. Sometimes I would go to parties with them or sports games and things like that. One weekend, I was with my friends until really late at night. I hadn't even been drinking, but I stayed out until like 2 a.m. I got back to my dorm room and was so tired that I pretty much went right to sleep. And in doing so, I forgot to lock the door to my room. The next thing that I knew, I was waking up sometime later in the night. When I awoke, I saw that it was still completely dark out. But the very next instant, I heard that my door was opening. That brought in a little bit of light, and I saw what appeared to be a man standing in the doorway. He appeared to be looking at me, but in the lighting I only really saw a silhouette mostly. But even with what little I could see, the man did not appear to be a college guy, and certainly not anybody that I knew. I kept watching, wondering what was going on. He didn't say anything, but just stood in the doorway looking at me for at least a minute. Then the man opened the door even more and was completely inside my room. He slowly and quickly closed the door behind him. At this point, I was really creeped out. When he was closing the door though, I got a good enough look at him to see that he was way older than most college students. He was at least in his 40s, probably his 50s if I had to guess. The man stood in the doorway for a little while. I was sort of pretending to be asleep, opening my eyes a tiny bit. The room was so dark though that it was hard to see anything, and now that the door was closed, it was even more difficult to see. The man then moved so that he was sort of out of my sight, going behind the end of my bed. I knew that I had to do something. I quickly sat up and reached for the drawer of my nightstand that was next to me. My dad had bought me some pepper spray and gave it to me for protection at college. I had never actually taken it out with me because I didn't think that I would ever need it, so I just put it in my drawer. But now, I was really glad that my dad had got it for me. After I got up, the man heard me and he moved out from where he was. He did not leave my room though. Instead, he started walking closer to me. In the dark, I was desperately fumbling around the drawer through all the junk trying to find the pepper spray. Thankfully, it was open because of course my dad had demonstrated to me how to use it. I finally found it and the man was now just feet away from me. He didn't say anything. He was just walking right towards me kind of slow. I pointed the pepper spray at him, but I don't know if he even saw it with how dark it was. Then I just started spraying. At first, I didn't know if it did anything because the man didn't run away. In fact, he got even closer. He reached out and almost grabbed it out of my hands. Then I started yelling really loud. I kept spraying, and some of it got in the air towards my face, and it definitely worked. When I kept spraying, it started to affect the guy more. I was yelling as loud as I could and spraying pepper spray everywhere. The combination caused the man to finally leave. He quickly ran away and out the door, then he left. I went over and locked the door, and for a few minutes I was too shocked to do anything. It all happened so fast, and I was shaking from the experience. Soon there was a knock on my door. I didn't want to answer it and was still holding the pepper spray. Then I heard a voice say, "Campus safety." Only then did I go over and look through the door. I saw that it was in fact a campus safety officer. I answered and he said that there was reports of loud yelling and wanted to know if everything was okay. I told him what happened and he ended up contacting the police. There was a search for the guy, but he was not found. I still don't know who he was. That was the only time anything like that happened to me in my time at college. I'm really glad that my dad got me that pepper spray.
This story happened to me in my first year of high school, many years ago. First off, let me premise by saying that I clearly understand how dumb of an idea this was. But I was a younger kid and I didn't think it through fully, and I just imagined that it would work. My parents had left to get my older brother from his friend's house because he had gotten hammered and was too drunk to drive himself home. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and I did what normal things a boy my age would do. Watched TV, played video games, and invited friends over when I wasn't supposed to. After my friends left my house, it was around 12:30 a.m., and my parents called me and said that they wouldn't be home until morning due to my brother passing out and needing medical attention. He had to go to the hospital due to alcohol poisoning, and by the way, he ended up being alright and recovered fine. I was 15 years old, home alone the entire night for the first time ever, and in the midst of puberty, I decided that tonight would be my night. I went on some online hooker website, and I found an attractive 19-year-old Asian woman who said she would do just about anything you could think of. So I hit her up and gave her my address. I told her I was about 3 years underage, and she said it was fine if we kept it a secret. It was around 1:45 a.m. when I heard a knock on my front door. I looked through the people and saw an attractive young Asian woman standing outside. She told me her name was Ashley and asked if I'd let her in. Letting my hormones control me, I let her in. She asked if she could use my bathroom first, and I told her that it was fine. While I waited for her, I looked at the car she arrived in, and in the faint shadow of her car, I saw another person sitting in the passenger seat. They were wearing all black clothing and looking at the house. I thought I was just imagining things, or that maybe it was normal, and this was her driver who was just going to wait outside the whole time. 10 more minutes went by, and she still hadn't left the bathroom, and as I was waiting, I heard footsteps walking through the rocks into my backyard. I was beginning to panic now, realizing how this was a terrible idea, and I shouldn't be letting random people into my house. The motion sensor lights in my backyard kicked in, and I went to take a look, and sure enough, it was the person I saw in all black before. Once they noticed I could see them because of the light, they booked it back to their car. The girl, who then came out of the bathroom, said that I scared her partner off, and that she was going to go out and get him. Once she left the house, I shut all the entrances to my house and locked them all. She looked back and noticed the noise of my dogs barking, had a quick conversation with the guy in all black, and then got into the driver's side of the car and drove away. I don't know what they were planning, but my guess is they were going to kidnap me for human trafficking. I'm not sure if that was their motive, but I was led to believe it because the lady left her phone in the bathroom. When I looked through it, I saw mysterious phone numbers, and after looking up the area codes online, they were linked with known human trafficking countries. Also, she didn't even seem to care that she had left her phone behind, making me think it was most likely a burner phone used for shady stuff. I'm just glad the night didn't amount to anything worse, and it easily could have. I never told my parents because I would have been in a lot of trouble, but I still learned my lesson from that night home alone.
This is something that happened at the last apartment building that I lived in. Overall, it was a pretty nice place. The building was fairly new, and it wasn't super cheap or anything. I liked living there for the most part. It wasn't perfect, but it was still pretty good. The apartment complex consisted of 3 buildings. 2 were right across from each other, and then the third was next to the first building. Running between all the buildings was a parking lot, and then there were sidewalks going all around the property. Surrounding the property were a few residential roads on one end, and then some commercial businesses on the other. Each building had 4 floors to it, so overall the apartment complex was pretty average. So one evening I was at home by myself and had recently gotten home from work. I think it was probably like 7 p.m. or so, and it was dark out by now. I got a call on my cell phone from a number that was in the same city as me, but the person was not in my contacts list. When I answered it, it was a woman's voice, and she said that there was a package for me in the mailroom. She said that she was one of the managers of the apartment complex, and she was letting me know that the package had been there for a couple of days, and maybe I didn't know about it and I should come and pick it up now. I was not aware that there was a package for me there, so I said thanks for letting me know. In fact, I hadn't ordered anything in a while, so I wasn't really sure what it could be. She asked me if I was home right now, and I said yes, and then she said that I should come down right now and get it, so I said that I would. Then we hung up, and I got my shoes on and left the apartment. My place was on the 3rd floor, so I walked down to the elevator and then got in it and took it down to the 1st floor. The mailroom in my building was inside the lobby but outside of the locking doors. Inside the first set of doors when you entered the building, but to the left of the second set of doors, was a small room for package deliveries. It was accessible to delivery drivers and DoorDash people that way, but it also meant that people could potentially steal the packages. However, I had never had a problem with that. So I walked off the elevator through the empty and quiet lobby and then went out the first set of doors. Then I turned and entered the small mailroom, and there was nobody else in the mailroom. There were a number of packages lying around though. Many people would take forever to pick up their packages and probably didn't even know that they were there.
so there was always like 10 or 20 boxes just sitting around on the ground or on the shelves. I looked around and picked up every single package and looked at the name, but there wasn't any that were for me. I was confused. In the time that I was there looking, I remember hearing the doors from the outside open, and I glanced over to see two large men enter the building, but they did not go in the second set of doors. Instead, they just stopped and stood around by the second set of doors, indicating that they did not live there. My thought was that they were waiting for somebody to come down and let them in. I just continued to look for my package. I literally picked up every single box in the mailroom twice and read every single name, but there was nothing for me. I was so confused now. I even opened up my small mailbox that was also in the room, but that too was empty. Why had this woman called me and told me to get my package now? I know that she had told me it was in the mailroom. Had she also called the other 20 or so people who had packages in the mailroom as well? And now it wasn't even there. Also, it was past business hours in the apartment offices, which closed at 5 p.m., so it was strange that she was calling me after hours for this as well. I had the idea that maybe she took the package to the office, although it seemed like a long shot, or maybe she had mixed me up with somebody else and called the wrong number. I didn't even know who this woman was. I had only briefly met one staff member of the apartment complex when I picked up my keys moving in long before this. So anyways, I decided to go back in the building. But now I had another dilemma. These two large men were still just standing by the doors, and had been there for like 2 or 3 minutes now, as I had been aimlessly searching around for my non-existent package. I didn't want to be the one to let them in, but as I walked over, figured I had no choice. We were not supposed to let people in the building unless we knew them, obviously, so I would prefer that whoever they were waiting for would let them in. As I made it to the lobby, I had the thought to just leave the building and then walk around and enter through a side door, but I told myself, no, don't be weird like that, just go in. So I walked over and unlocked the door with my key fob, but I was not going to hold the door open for these guys or anything. Hopefully they would be nice and not go in, but wait for their friend or whoever. As I walked past them, they said nothing. When I opened the now unlocked door, I heard them instantly start to quickly walk towards me. Before the door was even starting to close, one of the men grabbed it in a borderline aggressive fashion. They basically barged in right behind me and didn't say anything still. It kind of ticked me off, but I just ignored it and started walking into the lobby. The two men followed. I turned to the right and decided not to use the elevator. If these men were going upstairs, that would be really awkward, so I turned to the right to take the hallway down to the stairwell. But when I turned right, the men did as well, going right past the obvious elevator. So now, either A, they were going to a room over here, B, they just wanted to take the stairs for whatever reason, or C, they were following me. I hoped that it was not C. I walked down the hallway until I reached the doors to the stairwell. When I entered them, soon after, the men did as well. They were walking maybe 10 feet behind me. By this point, I was really nervous, so I decided to just leave the building. Before turning to go up the stairs, there's an exit door which is a side door to the building. As I walked, instead of going past it, I just opened the door and left. When I did, unbelievably, both men left the building as well. Now I knew that they were both following me, and I had no clue who these guys were. Basically, just out of instincts and a reaction, I just took off running. I sprinted down the sidewalk heading towards the now backside of the building. I made it to the corner and now heard both of the two men starting to sprint after me. I'm pretty fast, so I had that going for me. I just hoped that I was faster than these two men. After getting around the corner, I sprinted along the quiet back sidewalk of the apartment complex. I ran the entire stretch of it and felt like I had put a little distance between myself and the men. But I didn't slow down. I turned to the left and now sprinted back along the side of my building. There was another side door there. When I reached that side door, I very quickly slowed down. At that moment, the two men chasing me were now just reaching the corner. I knew that I had one shot to unlock the door, and I quickly took out my key fob and put it up to the door. Thankfully, it unlocked. I very quickly opened the door as I heard the men running towards me and quickly getting closer. I went inside and then made sure to slam the door shut behind me and it would automatically lock. When I did, I still heard the men approaching. Then I turned and started running for the staircase in that stairwell, which was the same thing as the other side of the building, just opposite. As I went to the stairs, the men reached the door, and I heard them trying to open it, but they couldn't get in. Then they started banging on the door as I ran up the stairs. I didn't stop running until I got up to the 3rd floor, and only then did I feel much better and started to calm down. I walked back to my apartment and went inside. Then I thought about the whole situation, and I realized the phone call was probably a setup. I called the cops on the guys and reported them, but when the police got there, the men were gone. They looked around but could not find them. The next day, I went to the apartment offices and met the managers. The woman who called me was not someone who worked there,
So she was in fact just trying to get me downstairs. It was all a setup. I don't know who she was or who those men were, and I don't know what they wanted either, but I thankfully never saw them again. When my lease was up, I moved, and I now live in a different apartment in a different city, but I will never forget that crazy experience. This happened when I was in high school. It was the summertime, and I think that I was about 15 or so. So I was home alone because both my parents had work, and my older sister also worked. I was too young to have a job, so I just stayed home and played video games on most days. That's what I was doing on one morning when I heard a knock on the front door. I never liked to answer the door. I didn't know who it was, but I figured it to be a salesman or something. I didn't even bother to get up. Whoever was at the door knocked again one more time. I just ignored it and kept playing video games. I hoped that they would go away, and after that second time, they stopped knocking. I figured that they were gone, so I never left my bedroom. So I continued gaming, and I quickly forgot about it. It was maybe 1 or 2 hours later when I heard a knocking at the front door again. I figured that the same person was back, but I still didn't know who it was. This time, though, I figured that I better get up and see. Plus, I was curious if they were going to be knocking on the door multiple times a day. So I left my bedroom and I walked over towards the door. I saw some random guy standing there, and I had no idea who he was, but I still didn't want to answer the door. He didn't seem to notice me, so I quickly went away. I went back to my bedroom and then just hoped that the guy would realize nobody was going to answer the door. I didn't know what he wanted, but I didn't really care either. The knocking stopped, and I figured that he was gone again. Moments later, the home phone rang. I didn't know if it would be my parents or something, so I got up to answer it. When I arrived at the phone, I picked it up and said hello. I heard a man's voice on the other end who I did not recognize. He said, "Answer the door," and then he hung up. I was really freaked out now. I went over to a window and looked out and saw that that same man was still standing there. I figured he had to be the one who just called. This was really strange, but it didn't make me want to answer the door anymore. In fact, it made me want to answer the door even less. A lot less. I went back into my bedroom and tried to just ignore it all. After that, I didn't hear any more knocking. Sometime later, I got up and checked out the window again, and the guy was not there anymore. I was glad that he was gone and hoped that he wouldn't come back. For the rest of that day, there was no more knocking. Soon my sister and parents got home from their jobs. I remember that later that night, my parents and I were in the living room. My dad noticed out the window there was a car parked on the side of the street. It was across the street, but sort of in front of our house. It was really rare to see cars parked on the street like that in our neighborhood. My dad said to my mom how it was strange. Then I remembered everything that happened, and I told my parents about it. My dad decided to go and see the car. All the lights were off, and we couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it, but I think we all figured that it was vacant. So my dad left the house and went outside. When he did, he had made it no more than 10 steps into the yard when the car suddenly started up. Then it quickly pulled away, driving off. It was definitely very suspicious, all right. After that, there was never any more knocking on the door when I was home alone.
When I was 12 years old, I lived with my parents and older brother. We had a 2-story home in a pretty typical neighborhood, and I liked it a lot. One night, I was left home alone by myself. My brother was over at a friend's house, and my parents would be gone until late. So I invited a friend to come over and hang out with me. It was my friend Jason, who lived just the next street over, so he could walk to my house. However, at around 9 p.m., he had to leave my place and go home because he wasn't allowed to stay out later than that. So we had been up in my bedroom playing video games, and I said bye to Jason and he left out the back door. I stayed in my room. I heard him leave, but only about 5 minutes later, I heard our back door open up again. I figured that Jason must have forgot something and came back to get it, and I didn't think much of it. However, I did not hear anything else for a while. I would have assumed Jason to walk right back up to my room or something. I stopped what I was doing at that point and listened. I didn't hear anything at first, but then, after a few seconds, I heard somebody walking through the main level of the house. This person was headed towards the stairs, and based on the way they walked, it seemed like a larger person or an adult male probably. I could just tell that it wasn't Jason. I was now very creeped out. It certainly was not my brother or my father either. I almost called out asking who it was, but I decided not to. Moments later, this person, whoever they were, started walking up the stairs. That's when I got very freaked out. I closed my bedroom door all the way quietly and then locked it. Soon after, the person made their way up to the top of the stairs and started walking down the hallway. I did not know what was going to happen. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, so I had no idea what to do. The person walked around the hallway upstairs for what felt like forever. Then, finally, they walked back downstairs. When this happened, I knew it was my chance to call the police. I walked over to my door carefully and then opened it as quietly as I could. I then ran to my parents' bedroom, which had a phone in it. After getting in there, I closed the door behind me and locked it, and then called the police. I didn't really hear any sounds from the main level of the house anymore. After calling 911, I hid under my parents' bed until the police got there. When they did, surprisingly, the person was still there. It was a man who I did not know, and the police arrested him hiding in the basement. It was a huge relief. My parents got home soon after. The man had entered the house through the back door, obviously. I think he must have somehow seen Jason leave and maybe thought that Jason lived there and the house was empty. I really don't know though. I have no idea where he came from in the first place. It was very creepy.
I currently live with my husband in a house, and we got married 2 years ago. But prior to that, when I was a single woman living alone, I lived in this apartment building. This was years ago, and overall, I liked living there. It was a nice one-bedroom place, and I lived on the second floor of the building, and the building was pretty new. One time, though, something really scary happened. I was home by myself one day that I had off of work. Sometime in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't know who it would be, and I walked over to the door to look out the peephole before answering. When I did, I saw some guy standing there who I did not recognize. He had this sort of bag with him, and the guy was wearing what looked like a tool belt. As I was looking at him through the peephole, he knocked again, this time announcing himself as maintenance. At that point, I opened the door for him, realizing that he must be the maintenance worker for the building. When I opened the door, he said that they were updating the key fobs for the building, and that it was a quick programming change. I asked him what that meant, and he told me to just give him my key and he would get it reprogrammed and back to me in like 5 minutes. So I stupidly gave him my key, trusting him and believing that he was the maintenance man. But as you maybe could guess by now, he was in fact not the maintenance man. However, I'm telling you, this guy played the role well, and I think he could have fooled many people. And even prior to that, at the apartment building that I lived in before that one, they literally did have to update the key fobs and lock system. That time, the maintenance guy did not get the key from me, but the system updated automatically. However, I remember seeing an email about it. So I guess that was still fresh in my mind and contributed to me believing him. Anyways, I gave him my key and he walked away, saying that he would be back in a few moments. Well, after he left, 5 minutes went by and there was nothing. Then 10 minutes, and then 15. When 30 minutes had gone by and the guy still didn't return, I was very confused. I wondered what was taking him so long, and I thought that maybe he forgot about me. So at that point, I decided to go down to the management offices because that was my only key. Thankfully, the offices were in my building. I walked down there and entered, and there was a woman working at the desk. I told her about the situation, and she told me that there was no update for the keys or locks. She said definitively that the maintenance guy would not be asking for my key, and asked who had come to my door. When I described him, she said that was not the maintenance guy who worked at the building. So I realized that I had been scammed by some random guy, and now he had my key. So at that point, the police were called. They came out to the building, and basically I talked to them and gave them my story, and they made a report. Then they looked around the property for the guy, but they couldn't find him, and then they left. Meanwhile, I was freaking out knowing that some random guy had my only apartment key. The manager at the complex was able to give me another key to the unit, but was unable to change the locks. She basically said that they could not change the locks right away, and a different company had to be contacted for that and stuff, and they would not be able to do so until the following day. I asked if I could stay in a different unit for that night or something, but she said no. So basically, I was on my own for the night. I really should have got myself a hotel, but I did not. I didn't have that much money at the time, and I thought that I should be good for one night. So I took all my valuables and brought them into my bedroom. Then I locked my apartment door, and then locked my bedroom door as well, and went to sleep. However, that night when I was in bed starting to drift off, I heard a noise. It was the sound of my apartment door being unlocked. Instantly, I was really nervous. Then I heard the door opening. I knew that the man was back.
I didn't waste any time and I called 911 on my phone and did it as quietly as I could. I ran into the connected bathroom in my bedroom and locked that door as well. Now I had 2 locked doors between myself and the intruder, but it still didn't feel like enough. I had no weapons to defend myself with or anything. As the man walked through my apartment, I quietly spoke to the cops on the phone. Then, pretty quickly, the guy tried opening my bedroom door. I was giving the police my address and telling them to hurry. I heard the man messing around with my door handle for a while. Obviously, my key fob would not unlock my bedroom door. That one locked from the inside, but the man was fumbling around with the door like he was trying to pick the lock. That's what I thought he was trying to do. This seemed to go on for quite a long time. I heard him messing around near the doorknob, and I was hoping that he wouldn't get in. And remembering him from before, he had a tool belt, so who knows what kind of lock-picking devices he had. After like 5 minutes that felt like a lot longer, I actually heard my bedroom door open. This really freaked me out. Now he was in my bedroom and there was only one door separating us. He walked around and soon made his way to the bathroom door. He tried opening that, but it was obviously locked as well. Then he lightly knocked on the door and said, "Maintenance." I didn't answer, but I was really freaking out now. Then the guy started to mess around with that lock. I knew that it was only a matter of time before he would be able to pick that one as well and get into the bathroom. I was terrified. But just seconds later, I heard more footsteps in the hallway and then heard them enter my apartment. The police were there. They got inside and announced themselves. I remember the man walked away from me and the cops were telling him to put his hands up. The guy tried talking his way out of it, claiming that he was confused and thought that this was his place. But the police weren't buying it and he was obviously lying. The man was arrested and I felt much better. After that, I was paranoid for a while, and even still, I'm sometimes really crazy about locking doors. Like if I'm home by myself, I always make sure that every door is locked multiple times and stuff. Overall, that was by far the craziest thing that happened to me when I lived alone. This happened 2 years ago. There was a normal day on the weekend and I happened to be home alone. I went about my business as usual and planned on just chilling and watching some movies for the night. I was used to being home alone, so I wasn't afraid at all. After all, I took precautions every time, and nothing remotely suspicious happened until then. At one point, I went on a walk as usual at midday. I usually have my headphones in, and at first I didn't notice that somebody was following me. But in the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a silhouette that was matching my footsteps. The person was walking alongside me on the other side of the pavement, synchronizing their movements with mine while watching me. I gathered the courage to face the person. There was an ordinary-looking man, seemingly in his 40s. There was nothing odd, creepy, or unusual about him besides the look on his face, which was emotionless, stiff, and haunting somehow. I could only bear to look at him a few seconds, as his glance was really unsettling. I continued walking while turning off my music player to be more aware of my surroundings. I kept my headphones in though, as I didn't want to tip him off that something was wrong. Out of the blue, he turned and started walking towards me. My heart was pounding, but I didn't stop walking. He got close and then said something to me. He asked how my mother was doing. Even though a creeping sensation was taking over me at the bizarre question as I didn't know him, I took my headphones out and asked him to repeat. He repeated the question, and I said my mom was fine and asked him how he knew her since I had never seen him before. He evaded the question and said that he hoped her and my grandparents solved their family issues, which couldn't have been known about since our family keeps their business private, especially from strangers. I was really nervous as I refused to respond and avoided eye contact with him. I couldn't make out his features very well since I was determined not to look him straight in the face, and I walked faster, taking a different route back to my house. I looked behind once again and saw him in the same spot, but now he was smiling and it was creepy. Every inch of my body told me to run, but I refrained, thinking that he would be excited by this challenge of chasing me down. I got home and sent my mom a message providing this guy's description to see if she knew him. She didn't reply, but somehow I managed to calm down by the end of the day. I watched some movies like I had planned, and by the time I went to bed, I almost forgot about the strange occurrence from earlier. That was until I was awakened by a knock at the door to my flat. I was sleeping in the living room, so I heard it right away. I checked my phone, and it was 4 a.m. An unsettling sensation creeped into me as I was gathering the courage to go and look through the peephole. Then there was a knock again. I finally got up and pulled away the cover off my peephole. There was that same strange man from earlier, his head very close to the peephole. I cannot describe what a grotesque sight that was. He could see me watching him and smiled. I could make out his features better this time. He had piercing blue eyes, black greasy hair, and a hooked nose. The best words to describe his face expression are creepy and disturbing, as his large smile didn't go up to his eyes and his teeth were really clean and white. He also seemed to be well dressed. He didn't strike me as a homeless man at all. Me observing him took about 2 seconds, and then he started waving at me while quietly giggling. That sound and the hand gesture pushed me over the edge. My heart sank, and I instinctively pulled away from the door. I grabbed a knife that was in the kitchen, as I didn't own a bat, pepper spray, or a taser. I was walking towards the farthest spot in my house from the entrance when I heard the most horrifying sound. He was trying the door repeatedly and pushed hard on it many times, hoping that it would break free from the lock. When I heard this, I called the police and explained the situation in a quiet voice. They said they would send someone. A good 20 minutes later, I was holding the kitchen knife still in anticipation, without daring to look out the peephole again. I knew this guy was still standing at my door. I could hear him breathing, and he would try to push or kick the door again every few minutes or so. When the sirens emerged in the distance, I let out a sigh of relief. As they came, the guy was nowhere to be found. I didn't hear him leave, so he must have slipped away quietly. The police questioned me, and I provided the man's description to them. In the morning, my mom responded and said that she did not know anybody who matched the description of the man that I had described to her. I told her what happened and offered a better description of the man. She still had no clue. 2 years have passed since then, and no other occurrences have happened. I don't know exactly what his intentions were, or how he knew about my family, but I was paranoid for a while. I recently remembered something crazy that happened back when I was younger. I think I was like 12 years old, and I recall that my parents left me home alone one night, which turned out to be a mistake. We lived in a pretty average neighborhood, in my opinion, and I had been left home alone several times before, not a ton, but enough to make me feel comfortable being home by myself. I don't remember where my parents were going, but I know that it was nighttime. I was in my bedroom when out of nowhere the doorbell rang, so I left my room and went to go see who was there. When I got to the window, I saw a man standing on the front step. He was wearing a McDonald's hat and a McDonald's shirt, indicating that he worked there. At first, I remember I thought that he was delivering food. But looking back, that was stupid because I know that McDonald's does not deliver. Sure, you can get it delivered like on Uber Eats or stuff like that, but a McDonald's employee is not going to drive to your house like a pizza guy. And back at the time of this story, food delivery was mostly just for pizza. I, as a 12-year-old, didn't know that though, and despite there not being food in the man's hands, I walked over to the door. I just remember thinking that he probably was delivering to the wrong house, and I needed to tell him that he was at the wrong place. So I went over and answered the door. When I opened it, he did not say that he had a delivery though. The guy said hi and asked if he could come in and use the phone. Right away, he seemed like a sketchy person when he was talking, and I even thought that, being a 12-year-old kid. The guy was skinny and overall looked kind of messy. He had greasy hair and a very patchy sort of beard, if you could even call it that. I knew that I probably should not let a stranger inside. I wanted to say no, but at first I did. I said no, but then the guy asked if he could just use the bathroom quick. He said that he would be really quick and then just leave. Now, I had no idea who he was or where he had come from or why he was at our door. I should have just slammed the door in his face, but instead, I did not. I told him that he could. I instantly felt stupid and regretted it, but I really thought that he was just going to use the bathroom and then leave. He entered the house and walked right past me and down the hallway. He walked really fast as well. He very quickly left the room and was gone out of my sight. The only problem is that he didn't even go where the bathroom was. In fact, he hadn't even asked me where it was at all. I stayed in the living room not knowing what to do. I waited for the man for a few minutes. After like 5 minutes had gone by and there was no sign of him or anything, I was getting worried. I walked over to where the bathroom was, and the door was open and the light was off. The man was not in there. I didn't know where he was. I nervously called out asking, but got no reply. Then I walked all around the house, but I didn't see him. I had no idea where he went. At that point, I got the phone and called my parents about it. When I told them what was going on, they told me to lock myself in my bedroom and said they were calling the police. So I did just that. When I was in my bedroom, I didn't hear anything at all. I had no clue if the guy was even still in our house, although I had never heard him leave or anything. So probably like 10 minutes later, the cops arrived. They entered the house and searched around for the man. He was found hiding in the basement. My parents got home a short time later. I'm not sure what the man's plan was. He was definitely sketchy though, and I don't really know what McDonald's had to do with this. He was just wearing a McDonald's uniform, but I remember hearing somebody say that he didn't even work there. I still feel stupid remembering it, knowing that I let him in the house. I obviously learned my lesson, but thankfully nothing like that happened again.
This is something that happened just a few weeks ago. It's still very fresh in my mind, and it gives me the creeps to think back to it. So it was an average night, and I was at home by myself. I live alone in an apartment building. I have a one-bedroom place on the 4th floor of the building. Overall, the place is nice, and nothing strange happened in my time here. This particular night, I did not have work the next day, so I was staying up late. I was just in my living room hanging out for a while, watching TV and playing around on my phone. Eventually, I got tired and decided to go to bed. By this point, it was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning or so. I turned off the TV, then turned out all the lights and was getting ready to get in bed. However, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of a knock on my apartment door. Instantly, I really got the creeps. When you're alone in a silent and dark apartment in the middle of the night, hearing a knock on the door has a different kind of effect. I wondered who on earth it could be. I slowly and quietly walked over to my front door. In that time period, whoever was there did not knock again. I did not dare open the door, but instead I looked through the peephole. When I did, I saw a man standing there wearing a creepy clown mask. It was a scary sight to see. I almost jumped back and ran away. He wasn't directly looking at me or anything, but standing like he was waiting for me to open the door. But I did not. I was not sure if he knew I was there on the other side of the door looking at him or not. I remained there and watched him. This was really weird because it was not anywhere near Halloween time, so why would someone be wearing this creepy clown mask? The guy kept standing around. He wasn't completely still, and a few times he took a step back and looked around, but he remained at the door a lot longer than I thought he would. I kept watching and didn't look away. Eventually, after what I would estimate to be about 2 or 3 minutes, he walked off down the hallway. I kept watching to make sure that he wouldn't come back. After about 5 minutes, I finally went to bed. Since then, he still hasn't come back or anything, but I'm still wondering who it was and why he did it. I'm not aware of him knocking on anybody else's door. I'm sure that I would have heard it if he did. I don't know any of my neighbors, and I don't know if anyone would pull a prank like that. I wonder what would have happened if I had answered the door, but I'm really glad I didn't.
I'm a woman in my late 20s who has recently decided to take my personal safety more seriously. Last winter, my boyfriend got me my first handgun as a Valentine's Day present. The same one he had, as I already had a bunch of range time with it. My boyfriend and his kids and I live 20 minutes outside of town in a small cabin in Alaska. While we're tucked away mostly by trees, we do have neighbors around us in a small neighborhood. We know most of the people who live in our loop and are familiar with everyone who takes walks around it. One morning in mid-October, we found a pack of crumpled up and mostly empty cigarettes and a couple butts scattered in our driveway. We were slightly spooked because no one we know smokes and we hadn't had any visitors. I mentioned maybe our dog had dragged them out of a neighbor's trash can since he had run off a couple times recently, but my boyfriend was still suspicious of how they were arrayed. We got a little more weary but mostly shrugged it off. I was home alone a couple of mornings later and hanging around the house in my pajamas, drinking coffee and thinking about doing some house chores. My puppy had been outside for a while, and at one point him running past a window in my bedroom caught my eye. He was stopped in the driveway in a very strange low stance, staring. I looked towards where he was facing. There in the woods, 20 feet from my house and 10 feet from my dog, was a woman. The first thing I noticed was her hands. They were outstretched at her sides and adorned with orange latex gloves. Next, I noticed her long, straight black hair, black skinny jeans, and her t-shirt cut off at the shoulders. She was standing just behind a short pile of logs with her head tilted back and her eyes closed. My brain was frozen initially. She stood there making weird movements. I got my phone out and called my boyfriend twice in rapid succession with no answer. I pulled up my camera to document, but my hands were shaking as I noticed my dog inching closer to her in curiosity. He was doing a weird back and forward dance, still in a half-curious, half-cautious pose. My mind was racing on what to do. Should I be videoing, or should I confront her first? Should I grab my gun? What if she was armed? What kind of drugs was she on? I realized I didn't want my pup to go near the crazy lady, and knew my boyfriend would be so disappointed if I confronted an iffy situation unarmed. I also didn't want to escalate the situation by waving a gun around. All these thoughts rushed through my mind in rapid succession during the few seconds while I fumbled for my camera. My pup moved even closer to her, only a couple feet away, and I made up my mind. I dropped my phone on the bed and grabbed my pistol from the top of the dresser, slid it out of its holster, and pointed it down and out with my finger firmly on the trigger. I walked up to the front door and pulled it open. I stepped halfway out onto the steps with my right hand with the gun concealed behind the door. I can't for the life of me remember if I called for my dog or confronted her first, but in between every sentence I said to her, I called him back to me. The third time he listened, and I ushered him inside. I called out, "Ma'am, what are you doing?" She looked up at me mildly surprised and said kind of quietly, "Nothing." I stated, "Well, you're on my property and you're behaving very strangely." I was relieved to hear my voice was steady. She paused for a minute and said, "No, I'm going to Val's house." I asked her where Val's house was, as I was trying to get an idea of where she came from. She pointed at the house I was standing half outside of and said, "That's Val's house." I said very firmly, "No, this is my house." She responded with, "Okay, I'll leave." She started gathering objects from the ground, what looked like a red bandana, a dark sweater, and after a few seconds of watching her fumble, I realized she was putting her boots on. She stumbled through the woods towards the driveway, and I shut the door and ran for my phone. I got a video of her walking in wide zigzags down my driveway. Later watching the video, I picked up more details I hadn't noticed, like the fact that she was wearing nice pricey boots and had a full sleeve tattooed on her right arm. This was my first questionable situation since I started concealing and carrying, and I was super glad to know the safety training I'd pounded into my head stuck. We posted the video on our local group page, and one of our neighbors messaged us not long after, saying they'd found her clothes in their driveway and sent pictures. We never got any more info on who she was or who her friend Val was. I checked the woods multiple times and couldn't tell if she'd been sleeping there. I can't imagine my dog would have let her go unnoticed. I went through each shed and storage place on our property for signs of activity or anything missing, and it all looked normal, but we started locking up better after that. This happened one frozen day in January many years ago. It was really cold out, probably well below freezing. I was home from college and at my parents' house. It was Christmas break and I didn't have to return to university for another couple weeks, so I was just using this time to relax and rest, as I did not have a job at the time or anything going on really. I would see my friends and hang out with them sometimes when I was home, but on this day I slept into probably 9 o'clock in the morning or so. When I woke up, both my parents were gone to work already, so I was home alone. I remember that I left my bedroom and went downstairs and turned up the heat because it was freezing. There was a decent amount of snow on the ground and I didn't dare go outside. But right after I got downstairs, I heard the sound of snow crunching from the backyard. It was like somebody was walking back there. Obviously I didn't know who would be in our backyard, so I walked over to the back side of the house and found a window. I looked out of it to see what was going on. When I did, I saw a man dressed in a full snowsuit walking there. The man had black snow pants, boots, a black coat, and was wearing a ski mask and even ski goggles it looked like, as well as gloves. So his identity was completely a mystery, but he looked fairly tall. I watched as the man walked through our snow-filled yard and then headed towards the back patio area. Then he went over to the back door to the house and tried to open it, but it was locked. I was shocked to see that, and now I was also creeped out. But he didn't just try once and then leave. The man remained by the back door. He also didn't seem to notice me looking at him out the window. So I walked over towards the back door. Then I yelled at the guy to go away. I figured that would scare him off. I didn't know the reasoning of why he was here, but he probably figured that nobody was home. Surely after hearing me yell at him, he would turn around and run away. But he did not. Instead of leaving or doing anything at all, the man seemed completely unfazed. He just continued to stand there, and then he started loudly knocking on the door with his big black gloves. It was almost like he had never heard me, but I know that he had to have. I didn't answer the door. After the guy knocked for a little while, he then stopped that and started kicking at the door, and he had some heavy-duty boots on, so I was kind of concerned. His kicks were rattling the door, and I didn't know how well it would hold up. The man continued on and on, kicking the door, and I moved away from that area and quickly got to the phone. I dialed 911 and reported that a man was trying to break into our house. Then I called my parents. All the while I was making these phone calls, the man was continuing to try to kick the door down. Thankfully, it somehow did not break. After probably 5 minutes, he finally stopped.
Then he seemingly walked away from the back door. I wasn't sure if he was leaving or just moving to another location to try to break into the house, so I went over to a back window after not hearing anything for a little while. When I looked, the man was no longer there. I didn't see him in the backyard at all. The police got there minutes later. They searched around the property and a bit of the neighborhood, but they somehow didn't find the guy. I'm not sure where he went. Possibly he had a car parked on another street nearby. I never found out who he was or why he did it. Why our house? It wasn't the nicest on the block or anything. That was a crazy thing.
I used to like power outages because it was fun as a kid having the whole house dark and only using flashlights and candles and such. That changed one night 3 years ago. It was late October, a little after 11 p.m. I was home alone because my roommate was visiting her parents. I had worked a long shift, so I went to bed early. I remember scrolling on my phone until my eyes felt heavy. I must have fallen asleep around 10:30 p.m. About an hour later, I woke up for no clear reason. I glanced at my alarm clock and saw the numbers were dark. The power was out. I reached over to look for my phone on the nightstand, but the charger light wasn't on. My phone had been at 2% when I went to bed, if I remembered right, and it hadn't charged it at all with the power being out. As soon as I opened it and tried to use the flashlight, my phone died on me. My next course of action was to go downstairs, grab a flashlight, and check through the windows if my neighbors still had power. I got out of bed and walked towards the hallway. When I stepped out of my room, I stopped. I stood and listened. I told myself houses make sounds, and I was on edge because the lights were out. Still, I moved quietly and carefully as I made my way slowly towards the stairs. Halfway down, I froze again. This time, I heard a faint click, like metal lightly touching metal. I didn't know what the sound was, but I forced myself to keep moving. At the bottom of the stairs, I peeked my head around the corner towards the kitchen and the back door, which is where the sound had come from when I was standing on the stairs. From where I was, I could see the back door was closed, but the small curtains over the window were moving slightly. Even though it was dark, from my spot, I could also see the deadbolt on the back door was unlocked. I always lock it every night. It was a habit that had been drilled into me since childhood. I couldn't see most of the kitchen from where I was looking around the corner, only about a fourth of it that contained the area with the back door, but I knew someone was inside my house. I didn't know where the intruder was, but I decided to take a risk, and I bolted through the living room and out the front door and into the yard. I didn't even stop to put shoes on. I jumped over the small fence and ran to my neighbor's house, banging their door until they opened it. Oddly enough, my neighbor's power was still working. The police came and searched through my house. They found a small cut in the power box outside, like someone had cut the main cable. They found muddy prints in the kitchen, hallway, and near the stairs, but they didn't find the person. Nothing was stolen and nothing was broken. Whoever had walked into the house in the dark slipped away when I ran. With the intruder cutting the power to my house and then not breaking or taking anything, it felt like some sort of personal attack to me. For months after, I slept with a light on and even bought a gun to keep near me at night, just in case that same intruder ever thinks of trying again whatever they were planning.